What if everything we thought we knew about the ancient world was just the surface? Before history, before writing, before pyramids or empires, there were whispers. Monoliths in deserts, glyphs no one can read, bones where no one should be. These are the riddles buried in our prehistory, unsolved, unexplained, unforgettable. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. This isn't mythology, it's evidence. Welcome to 53 most unsolved prehistoric mysteries that cannot be explained. You've entered the oldest cold case file on Earth, and the trail begins now. Before we dive in, if ancient mysteries, forgotten worlds, and cinematic deep dives are your thing, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss what's buried next. While you're here, drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Because somewhere, someone's watching this at 3 a.m., and the mysteries are just getting started. Göbekli Tepe's purpose cult center, settlement, or both, and why it was repeatedly buried. In the dry hills of southeastern Turkey, a mound rises like a clenched fist from the Paleolithic earth. For thousands of years, no one noticed what it was, just another bump in a land full of them. But in 1994, a shepherd stumbled on something strange, a slab of stone, unnaturally smooth, curving from the soil like a rib. What lay beneath would change everything we thought we knew about prehistory. Göbekli Tepe is the world's oldest known megalithic complex, older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years, older than the wheel, older than cities, writing, or agriculture. Radiocarbon dating pins it at around 9,600 BCE, right on the tail end of the last ice age. And yet, whoever built this thing had the time, organization, and collective vision to haul limestone pillars, some over 16 feet tall and weighing 10 tons, up a barren hill and carve them into T-shaped monoliths, arranged in circular enclosures. On the stones are reliefs, foxes, scorpions, boars, vultures, snakes carved with haunting elegance, as if chiseled yesterday. Here's where things get weird. The people who made Göbekli Tepe were hunter-gatherers. No plows, no cities, no domesticated animals, just spears, berries, and ritual firelight. So, the question that's been gripping archaeologists like a fever is why? Why would small, scattered bands of nomads invest decades, even centuries, building what looks like a cathedral? Theory 1. It was a cult center, a holy place where bands gathered to worship, perform rituals, and perhaps commune with the dead or the divine. There are no signs of daily life, no hearths, no trash middens, no dwellings, just circles of stone, layered one on top of another, buried deliberately and rebuilt again. The carvings suggest shamanistic or totemic symbolism. Maybe these were cosmological temples, charting the underworld or sky. Maybe they staged rituals to control the seasons or the dead. Theory 2. It was a settlement, at least temporarily. Some have argued that the surrounding hills could support herding and that the site shows signs of nearby food processing. Others suggest a combination of uses, part sanctuary, part seasonal hub. But the most baffling detail? The builders buried it, multiple times, carefully, deliberately. Enclosures filled in with debris, then a new one built on top. Like they were preserving it for someone, or hiding it from something. And this brings us to the real gut punch. Göbekli Tepe flips the timeline. The standard story was, first farming, then cities, then religion. But this site suggests the opposite religion, or at least organized ritual, came first. Perhaps humans built temples not because they had farms, but because they needed farms to support the gatherings. Imagine that. The need to worship, creating the need to settle. Faith dragging agriculture behind it like a plow. The beginning of civilization sprouting from stone circles on a lonely Turkish hilltop. But if this was a spiritual birthplace, What were they afraid of enough to bury it again and again? And as we walk away from those buried rings of silence, we reach another mystery of stone. This time, one everyone's heard of, but no one fully understands. Stonehenge logistics, how Neolithic builders moved, raised sarcens, and why those astronomical alignments mattered. There it stands, as familiar as a screensaver and as mysterious as a riddle carved in basalt. Stonehenge. Its image is so burned into the global consciousness that it feels like a cliché until you stand there. Until the wind cuts across Salisbury Plain, and you realize those stones are alive. They loom, they hum, and they defy logic. Built in stages between 3000 and 1500 BCE, Stonehenge is a Neolithic Frankenstein of engineering, astronomy, and obsession. Some stones, the smaller blue stones, were hauled from Wales, nearly 150 miles away. The larger sarcens, they weigh up to 30 tons each and were quarried from Marlborough Downs, about 25 miles off. So, how? No wheels, no cranes, no beasts of burden, just ropes, logs, and a lot of grunting? Theories abound. Wooden sledges, greased tracks, log rollers, water transport, or a vast labor force dragging each stone inch by inch. One group even tested the stone ball bearings theory. Yes, Neolithic marbles. It sort of worked. But transporting was just part one. They also raised them, vertically, then capped them with horizontal lintels, perfectly notched to fit like Lego. This wasn't random. It was architectural genius. And it's aligned precisely with celestial events. On the summer solstice, the sun rises through the heelstone like a cosmic bullseye. The winter solstice, sunlight sinks along the central axis like a flaming arrow into the earth. So what did this alignment mean? Ancient calendar, agricultural almanac, a theater for sun cult rituals? One theory paints Stonehenge as a place of healing. Another sees it as a massive burial ground. There's evidence of cremated remains, bones scattered through the phases. Then there's the theory of acoustic design like Göbekli Tepe. Perhaps the stones weren't just visual but auditory tools, resonant chambers to amplify chants, drums, or silence. But here's the real twist. Stonehenge didn't appear fully formed. It evolved. The site began as a circular ditch and bank. Then stone by stone became the monument we recognize. It was never finished. The builders were part of something larger than themselves, a story that outlived them. This place wasn't just about stones. It was about time, capturing it, marking it, defying it. And for all our drones, LiDAR scans, and archaeological models, we still don't fully know why. But Stonehenge is loud compared to the next one. Imagine a monument just as grand but buried so deep in mystery, it doesn't even shout. It whispers. A green hill shaped by hands and time, but with no voice to explain itself. Silbury Hill, Europe's largest prehistoric mound with no agreed function. At first glance, Silbury Hill looks like just another grassy bump in the Wiltshire countryside, but stand near it and you'll feel the scale shift. It's massive, looming, artificial. The largest man-made prehistoric mound in Europe, nearly 40 meters high, constructed around 2400 BCE, with chalk and earth moved bucket by aching bucket, a Neolithic Everest in the middle of nowhere. And yet, unlike pyramids or ziggurats, Silbury Hill has no chambers, no tombs, no treasure. Excavations have yielded nothing. No body, no shrine. Just layers upon layers of chalk, piled with staggering precision. Soil analysis shows it was constructed in phases over decades, maybe even a century. Like someone said, build a mountain, and they just did. So, what was it? Some suggest a burial site, but no bones have ever been found. Others propose it was ceremonial, a platform to commune with the sky, a sacred hill to mark celestial cycles. After all, Nearby Avebury and other Neolithic sites suggest a ritual landscape woven with symbolic geometry. The people of this region were clearly up to something cosmically ambitious. Another theory? A show of power. A monument to coordination. Look what we can do when we work together. A community's version of a flag planted on time itself. Still others see it as symbolic of a pregnant Earth Mother, the mound as womb life-giver and death receiver, a visual metaphor carved from soil. And then there's the darker idea. Maybe Silbury was built not for a person or a god, but for an idea, a myth, a memory, something they were afraid to forget or needed to prove they remembered. But the real mystery isn't just what it is. It's why, after so many years, the meaning never survived. Oral traditions gone, no inscriptions, just a silent hill, looming with intent we can no longer read. Maybe that's the point. Maybe Silbury was built to last longer than the story itself. A riddle in dirt. A monument not to the dead but to forgetting. And if Silbury is a puzzle of purpose, the next site is a puzzle of light. Carved into the Irish earth, aligned not just with seasons, but with something deeper, something solar, something eternal. Newgrange's design intent beyond the winter solstice sunbeam. What was the passage tomb's broader ritual role? In the lush green hills of County Meath, Ireland, sits a hill that's not a hill. It looks like one grassy, domed, gentle. But beneath its soft curves lies one of the most astonishing prehistoric structures on the planet. Newgrange. Built over 5,000 years ago, older than the Great Pyramid of Giza, older than Stonehenge, it is a passage tomb, a chambered mound, and a cathedral of light, all in one. But it's the light that steals the show. Each winter solstice, if the sky is clear and the ancient gods are feeling generous, a beam of sunlight slices through the roof box above the entrance and penetrates the long stone corridor. The beam inches down the passageway until it strikes the rear chamber, flooding it with golden light for 17 heartbeats. Then it vanishes, and for another year, darkness returns. It's easy to fixate on this moment. After all, what kind of Neolithic people could align a structure with such laser precision? The solar engineering is surgical. The passage, 19 meters long, is slightly curved, yet designed so perfectly that the light touches the inner chamber only during a few precious mornings around the solstice. Not before, not after. Clearly, this wasn't just burial. It was theater, cosmic theater. So what was Newgrange? Beyond a celestial spotlight. Inside the chamber are large stone basins, likely used for holding cremated remains. The walls are carved with spirals, lozenges, and concentric shapes. This isn't just graffiti. It's a visual language we no longer understand. One motif repeats often, the triple spiral, or triskele. It could represent the sun, cycles of life and death, or a kind of cosmic rebirth. We don't know. The artists left no Rosetta Stone. It's easy to say passage tomb and move on, but what does that even mean? Some theorize Newgrange wasn't just for the dead, but for guiding the souls of the dead, a gateway between worlds. The solstice light wasn't just decorative, it was functional. It revealed the moment when the veil between the living and the dead was thinnest, when ancestors could be seen again, just for a moment. Others see it as an initiation site. Picture it. A initiate led through the dark passage, then reborn in light, metaphorically and maybe psychotropically. There's evidence that mind-altering rituals could have been part of these Neolithic ceremonies. Trance, vision, time dilation. The acoustics inside are strange too. Chanting or drumming would echo in hypnotic loops. The stone walls curve inward, cradling sound and creating a sensory womb. This wasn't just architecture, it was an instrument. And there's another level. Community. Building Newgrange would have taken hundreds of people, decades of labor, and shared religious commitment. It wasn't just about the structure, it was about the act of building it. coordinated labor for cosmic purpose. Stone by stone, they carved meaning into the landscape. And then they covered it. Grass, earth, white quartz stones. Not hidden, but blended. Newgrange is not just a tomb, not just a calendar. It is a stage, a ritual site, a cosmic engine, and a timeless question mark. And just as Newgrange channels the light of the sun, our next mystery channels a different kind of alignment. Thousands of stones, marching across the earth in rows like ancient armies frozen mid-step. The Carnac alignments, why thousands of standing stones were set out in vast rows. On the wind-blown coast of Brittany, France, the land ripples with stone. Thousands of granite monoliths, known as the Carnac stones, march across the fields in eerie, meticulous lines. They stretch for miles. Some are small, like tombstones. Others are giants, towering over the landscape. And no one, not even the best minds in archaeology, knows exactly why they're there. The numbers alone are absurd. Over 3,000 megaliths, erected between 4,500 and 3,300 BCE, making Carnac the largest concentration of standing stones in the world. These aren't randomly placed. The stones are aligned rows upon rows, like ancient soldiers standing at attention. Geometric precision meets geological chaos. So, what were the builders doing? And why so many? One theory sees the stones as a prehistoric observatory. The alignments may correspond with lunar and solar cycles, calendrical functions for tracking the seasons, solstices, or agricultural timing. But the problem is, the patterns aren't consistent. Some rows bend, others shift slightly. If this was a clock, it's an erratic one. Another possibility, ritual pathways. Some believe the rows were spirit roads, channels for ceremonial processions or funerary rites. The dead would be carried along the stones in ritual parades, guided by stone sentinels into the afterlife. Others suggest the alignments had acoustic properties. Maybe they were arranged to reflect or channel sound, like massive tuning forks planted in the earth. Or they served as territory markers, projecting political or religious control. But maybe we're thinking too small. What if the stones are stories, not words, but a kind of physical narrative, an oral tradition fossilized in rock, each row a verse, each stone a beat, the memory of a tribe mapped into the soil? There's another strange fact. Some of the stones seem to be recycled. Earlier menhirs were knocked down and reused in tombs. This suggests that meaning shifted over time. What started as sacred may have become mundane, or vice versa. Maybe the builders forgot what the stones meant and repurposed them the way we repurpose ruins, half understanding the sacredness under our feet. And as with many megalithic mysteries, there's the wild card, the Giant's Causeway legends. Local myths say the stones were petrified soldiers, frozen in place by a wizard. Which, symbolically, isn't far off. They do look like an army turned to stone, still locked in ranks millennia later. But the real enigma? Why so many? Why there? And why such obsessive alignment? And if Carnac is an army of stones, our next mystery brings us to another circle, more intimate, less sprawling, but just as unknowable. A ring of pillars perched on an island far to the north, staring into the cold, clouded skies of Scotland. Callanish stones. A lunar solar observatory, a ritual complex, or both. On the Isle of Lewis in Scotland's Outer Hebrides, amid moorland and mist, stands a megalithic site so haunting it could have been designed by dreams, the Callanish stones. Tall, thin slabs of Lewisian gneiss, some nearly 5 meters high, arranged in a cruciform pattern centered around a stone circle. The site dates to around 2900 BCE, and it feels like a place designed not just for function, but for awe. The stones glow silver under moonlight. They cast long shadows across the peat. There is no noise but the wind, and the occasional call of seabirds, like ghosts asking questions. So, what was it for? One prominent theory is astronomical. Callanish, like Stonehenge and Newgrange, may have been designed to track celestial cycles. But where those sites focused on the sun, Callanish might have focused on the moon. Specifically, the lunar standstill, a rare event that occurs every 18.6 years when the moon rises and sets at its northernmost and southernmost extremes. During the major standstill, the moon appears to roll along the horizon, aligning eerily with the stone avenues at Callanish. Some believe the site was built as a lunar observatory, allowing Neolithic peoples to track time not by solar crops, but by the moon's silent rhythm. Others see Callanish as a temple, a place of ritual gathering, feasting, or ancestor worship. There's evidence of burials and fires, of offerings left behind. Some stones may have represented deities or spirits. The cruciform layout suggests symbolic geometry, not just utility, but cosmology. Still others interpret the site as a center of pilgrimage, a sacred destination. The journey through the landscape, from the coast through the heather to the stones, becomes part of the ritual. A spiritual processional, each visitor entering a liminal space between land, sea, and sky. Then there's the idea that Callanish is both lunar and spiritual. That time itself, cosmic time, was the religion, and tracking it, marking it, aligning with it, was a sacred act. But just like the silence inside Newgrange and the endless rows at Carnac, Callanish refuses to give up its final answer. The stones still stand, still align, still whisper, but they do not explain. And as we leave these moon-haunted stones behind, we come to a village carved into the earth, a Neolithic time capsule frozen in peat, abandoned in a hurry and never fully understood. Skara Brae's sudden abandonment, climate shock, social change, or something else. Off the storm-lashed coast of Scotland, in the Orkney Islands, lies a village that time forgot literally, Skara Brae. A Neolithic settlement preserved so perfectly that it feels like the people just stepped out to gather firewood and never came back. Stone walls intact, beds still carved into the rooms, shelves still standing. Hearths in the center, even carved stone dressers, possibly the world's earliest IKEA. It's often called the Scottish Pompeii, but that's a misnomer. Pompeii was buried in fire. Skara Brae was buried in time, in wind, sand, and centuries of silence. Discovered in 1850, after a violent storm stripped away layers of earth from a seaside mound, Skara Brae revealed 8 interconnected homes linked by covered passageways. Radiocarbon dating places the site between roughly 3,180 and 2,500 BCE contemporary with the construction of the Great Pyramid. But the people of Skara Brae weren't building empires or writing in hieroglyphs. They were living quiet, structured lives in stone houses overlooking a gray, unforgiving sea. Inside, everything is compact, efficient, and surprisingly modern. Each house features a central hearth, beds built into the stone walls, and storage areas. There's even a drainage system, primitive indoor plumbing, basically. It's hard not to admire their ingenuity. These were not primitive savages huddling in caves. These were skilled engineers living in community, cooperating to survive on the edge of the world. But then, they vanished. There are no signs of violence, no bodies, no sudden disaster, just a community that lived for centuries then walked away. So what happened? One theory is climate. Around 2,500 BCE, the North Atlantic climate began to shift. Storms became harsher, winters colder. Agriculture in Orkney, already difficult, may have collapsed. Life on the coast would have been increasingly punishing. Maybe the sea became an enemy, salt poisoning the soil, floods creeping inland, wind tearing roofs off, and eventually the people said enough and left. Another possibility is social transformation. Maybe there was internal upheaval, a shift in leadership, belief systems, or external pressure from other tribes. Skara Brae may have been part of a larger cultural network in Neolithic Britain. If the system changed, the village may have lost its reason to exist. Or was it ritual? Could the village have been intentionally abandoned, not as an act of desperation, but of closure? A sacred ending to a cycle? After all, their homes were not destroyed. They were sealed, protected, like a shrine to everyday life. Then again, maybe they didn't vanish at all. Maybe they just moved, shifted inland. The settlement may be only one chapter of a larger, mobile community whose traces have eroded away or remain hidden under centuries of turf. And here's the irony. While Skara Brae is famous for how much of it remains, it's the unanswered question at its heart that gives it power. Why did they leave? And speaking of symbols left behind, carved into the very hills and seen only from above, our next mystery takes us south into the chalk downs of England, where a horse with no rider has been galloping through time. Uffington White Horse. The true age range is known, but what did the figure signify? Etched into the rolling hills of Oxfordshire, England, the Uffington White Horse is a creature made of absence. A 110-meter-long figure cut into the chalk hillside, its body outlined by deep trenches filled with white stone. Its form is abstract, almost alien. Elongated neck, curved legs. A minimalist beast painted not with pigment, but with void. And for centuries, no one knew how old it really was. Some thought it was Celtic, carved by Iron Age druids. Others believed it was Roman, medieval, or even more recent. But then came the hard science. Using optically stimulated luminescence dating, archaeologists confirmed that the horse was made sometime between 1380 and 550 BCE, likely around 1000 BCE. It is, without a doubt, one of the oldest hill figures in Britain, older than Rome, possibly older than Homer's Iliad. And it's still visible today because generation after generation return to it, maintaining the trenches, refilling the chalk, keeping the figure alive. But what does it mean? The obvious answer is symbolic power. Horses were important in Bronze Age Britain, not just for transport, but for status and warfare. A tribe that claimed the horse as its totem might have used this image to project dominance over the landscape. This is our land, our sky, our beast. Others argue the figure isn't just a horse. Its abstract shape has led some to suggest it's a dragon, a lion, or even a solar symbol. Maybe it wasn't about animals at all, but about motion, speed, strength, the ability to transcend the ordinary. There's also the sky connection. From the ground, you can barely see the horse, but from the air or from the opposite hill, it's unmistakable. This has led to theories about ritual visibility. Maybe it was meant for the gods, for the dead, for sky watchers. And let's not ignore its proximity to other ancient sites. The Ridgeway, an ancient trackway, runs nearby. So does Wayland's Smithy, a Neolithic tomb. The landscape is layered with meaning, suggesting that the Uffington horse wasn't isolated, it was part of a sacred geography. Still, the mystery persists. Why go through the trouble of carving this creature, maintaining it for thousands of years, if it had no deep significance? And maybe that's the point. Maybe it was a god, a guardian, a being etched into the bones of the earth to watch over those who passed below. But if the horse is silent in chalk, the next site is drenched in meaning wooden pillars, standing in salt marsh soil, with an upturned tree at its heart, like a ritual in reverse. Seahenge. Why a timber circle was erected on a salt marsh, and what the upturned stump meant. In 1998, the tides shifted along the Norfolk coast, and something strange emerged from the sand. Not stone, but wood. A ring of weathered timber posts, over 50 of them, arranged in a tight circle with an upturned oak stump in the center. It was quickly dubbed Seahenge, a nickname that stuck, even though it's got nothing to do with stone. Dated to around 2049 BCE, Seahenge is one of the most enigmatic prehistoric monuments ever discovered in Britain. The timbers, preserved for millennia in anaerobic peat, showed signs of careful shaping. Some were split, others hammered in with bronze axes. The central tree stump roots facing skyward was clearly placed with intent. But why? First, the location. A salt marsh. Not farmland, not forest, not village. This was liminal space between land and sea, a place of transition. That's important, because in many ancient cultures, places at the boundary of worlds, shores, caves, bogs, were seen as portals, spaces where this world and the next touched. Now consider the stump, inverted, like death itself had been flipped. Some see it as a symbol of the underworld, others as a seat for a shaman. Perhaps it represented the axis mundi, the world tree turned upside down to invite spirits to descend. There's no evidence of regular use, no signs of fire, feasting, or burial, which makes it even more haunting. This wasn't a community space. It was a moment, a ritual frozen in time. One theory is that it was a mortuary site. The deceased may have been laid on a raised platform in the center, exposed to the elements and scavengers in a practice known as excarnation. The soul released skyward. The body returned to the earth. Another idea is astronomical. The posts may have aligned with solar or lunar events. If so, it links Seahenge to the great celestial monuments of the age. But unlike Stonehenge or Callanish, Seahenge was hidden, surrounded by marsh and shifting tides. This wasn't made to be seen by many, but remembered by few. Then there's the broader mystery. Seahenge wasn't unique. A second circle was found nearby, less intact but equally strange. These timber rings may have been part of a wider ritual network, structures that vanished because they weren't built in stone. How many others are buried under the silt and surf, lost to time? The controversy didn't end with discovery. Excavations sparked local protests. Some wanted it left in place, others feared it would vanish under the sea. The timbers were eventually removed, studied, and preserved, but the debate only added to the site's mythic aura. Today, Seahenge is a riddle, a tree turned upside down, a circle facing no one, a sacred act in a forgotten tongue, a monument not to permanence, but to decay, renewal, and return. And as that inverted tree clawed at the sky, it mirrored another ancient object, smooth, round, carved by hand, and completely inexplicable. A relic not of nature, but of intention and of imagination. Scotland's carved stone balls, weapons, weights, status symbols, or something entirely different. In the windswept highlands and lowlands of Neolithic Scotland, buried in tombs or hidden in bogs, hundreds of mysterious stone orbs have been found. Small, smooth, and carved with exquisite precision, they fit easily in the palm of a hand. Most are roughly the size of a baseball, but their designs are anything but simple. Some have 6 knobs, others have 8 or even dozens. A few are covered in swirling patterns, spirals, geometric grooves, and complex symmetry. They're not decorative in the modern sense. These weren't just pretty rocks. They were crafted, deliberately, skillfully, and their function remains one of the most confounding riddles of prehistoric Europe. Over 500 of these carved stone balls have been discovered, mostly in the northeast of Scotland, dating to between 3000 and 2500 BCE. That's the same time Stonehenge was rising, the same era as Skara Brae and the standing stones of Callanish, a period of immense cultural creativity but also profound enigma. So what were they? First theory, weapons. The shape and heft suggest they could be attached to ropes or used as slings. Imagine a Neolithic warrior spinning one of these balls above his head, flinging it at an enemy with lethal precision. But many are far too finely made, and some too delicate for practical combat. If these were weapons, they were ceremonial ones. Second theory, weights. standardized measuring tools for trade or barter. But again, the balls vary in size and weight. There's no clear consistency. It's like every one of them was unique, as if mass production was the least of their concerns. Third theory, symbols of status or power. Now this starts to get interesting. Many of the most elaborately carved balls were found in or near high-status burials. Some even theorized that these orbs were early forms of insignia like scepters or badges. Physical emblems of authority. This ball means I speak for the ancestors. This pattern means I command the harvest. That sort of thing. But there are even more abstract possibilities. Some researchers have suggested the balls were used in games precursors to bowling or strategy-based contests. Others believe they were spiritual tools, held during rituals or meditations. Their tactile feel is undeniable, smooth, perfectly grippable. It's not hard to imagine a priest or shaman rolling one in their palm while chanting under the moon. And then there's geometry. Some carved stone balls exhibit remarkably accurate representations of platonic solids, shapes not formally described until ancient Greece, thousands of years later. Did Neolithic Scots understand something about math, symmetry, and spatial relationships that we've completely underestimated? Still, the greatest mystery might be the why behind the effort. These weren't quick carvings. Some would have taken weeks to sculpt, polish, and etch. All for a palm-sized object that had no obvious utility. That screams significance. Whether religious, social, or cosmological, these balls mattered. And perhaps that's what's so powerful about them. They invite the touch. They demand to be held, but they do not explain themselves. But while these mysterious spheres rest quietly in museums today, across the Mediterranean Sea lies a very different kind of mystery. One where the architecture itself rises from stone, and the questions grow with every column. Malta's megalithic temples. How small island communities organized such monumental building and why. On the sun-baked islands of Malta and Gozo, scattered across rocky plateaus and golden plains, rise some of the oldest freestanding stone structures in the world, older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge. Massive temples carved from limestone, some over 5,500 years old, built by communities with no metal tools, no draft animals, and no written language. They are temples. That much we know, or at least we think we know. Structures like Ajar Chim, Menajra, and Tarksien are breathtaking in their complexity. Multi-room layouts, curved walls, corbelled roofs, even altars and statues of what appear to be fertility figures, broad-hipped, faceless icons of womanhood or divinity. But the real mystery isn't just how they were built, it's why. Let's start with the logistics. The largest stones weigh over 20 tons. Some are so massive that, even with modern machinery, moving them would be a challenge. Yet the builders of Malta managed to transport them, position them, and stack them with astonishing precision, using nothing more than stone hammers, ropes, levers, and sheer determination. This wasn't random piling. These temples were engineered. Many align with solstices or equinoxes. Doorways channel sunlight into specific chambers during specific times of year. The architecture dances with the sky, like a Neolithic symphony of light and stone. But here's the kicker. These weren't urban societies. Malta had no cities, no armies, no centralized governments, as far as we can tell. So how did small island communities mobilize the labor and expertise to build temple complexes? It points to shared belief, collective religion, cultural systems so strong they could bind disparate groups into organized effort. Maybe the temples were seasonal gathering places, pilgrimage sites. Maybe they were focal points for rites of passage, birth, puberty, marriage, death. Then there's the art. Many temples feature carvings of spiral patterns, plants, animals, and abstract forms. Some even suggest early forms of proto-writing or sacred symbology. What were they saying? What were they invoking? The answers lie somewhere between the carvings and the architecture itself. But Around 2500 BCE, something changed. The temple culture disappeared. No signs of invasion or catastrophe, just a quiet vanishing. Some theorize climate change. Others suggest cultural fatigue or population collapse. Whatever happened, the stones remained, but the meaning behind them faded like a whispered chant lost in the wind. Even today, walking through those curved chambers, there's an eerie sense of presence, the kind of silence that feels occupied, the kind of mystery that stares back. And if Malta's stone temples pose architectural riddles, the next site dives deeper underground, into chambers not just built, but acoustically tuned. A labyrinth of echo and resonance, designed for sound, shadow, and spirit. Hal Saflieni Hypogeum acoustics were resonant chambers engineered for trance ritual. Beneath the streets of Paola, Malta, lies a temple like no other, a sanctuary cut not from stone blocks, but into the bedrock itself, the Saflieni Hypogeum. Discovered in 1902, accidentally, during construction work, it remains one of the most complex underground structures ever found from the Neolithic world. And its mystery is not just visual, it is auditory. Carved between 4000 and 2500 BCE, the Hypogeum stretches over 3 levels of chambers, halls, and corridors, reaching more than 10 meters below ground. It was used as a burial site. Over 7,000 individuals were interred here. But calling it a cemetery is like calling the Sistine Chapel a painting room. This was a temple of transformation. The walls are smooth, the ceilings domed. In one chamber, the oracle room has acoustics that are nothing short of supernatural. Speak in a normal voice, and the sound vibrates through the walls, filling the entire complex with an eerie, bone-deep resonance. Studies have shown that frequencies around 110 Hz, the same produced by low male chanting, cause physical sensations in the body. Goosebumps, disorientation, even altered brainwaves. The kind of frequencies that ancient cultures may have associated with divine presence. Did the builders of the Hypogeum know this? Was the site designed to induce trance? Some archaeologists believe yes. The structure wasn't accidental. The chambers amplify specific sounds while deadening others. They curve in ways that guide echo like liquid through pipes. It's an engineered resonance, whether by empirical experimentation or inspired intuition. Imagine a ceremony, dim torchlight, chanting in the dark, the walls vibrating, the dead all around, a sensory cascade sound, shadow, silence, and spirit, a ritual not seen, but felt. And unlike most Neolithic sites, which are open air and expansive, the Hypogeum is inward, introspective, a journey into the earth, not up toward the sky. Perhaps it wasn't just about honoring the dead, but becoming them. A rehearsal for death, a sacred descent. Then there are the red ochre spiral paintings on the ceilings, some still visible after 5,000 years. Spirals, always spirals, symbols of cycles, movement, transformation. Time loops in pigment and stone. But like all the others, the Hypogeum is silent now. No chants, no torches. Just the faint echo of tourists' footsteps and the hum of modern air conditioning. And just as these spiral chambers wind down into darkness, the next mystery runs like twin grooves across the surface of the earth. Parallel lines carved into bedrock, with no clear beginning, no known end, and absolutely no explanation. Malta's cart ruts. What made the island's parallel rock grooves and when? Scattered across the sun-bleached rock of Malta and its smaller sister island Gozo are some of the most puzzling scars in the prehistoric landscape. Deep, parallel grooves worn into solid limestone, snaking across hillsides, dipping into valleys, and in some places, running straight into the sea. These are the cart ruts, a term that implies an origin carts. But no one can prove that's what they were. In fact, No one can prove what they were at all. They crisscross the landscape like phantom railway lines. Some are straight, others curve and swerve like drunken scribbles. They run in pairs, roughly spaced apart like the tracks left by wheels. But the spacing varies, sometimes too narrow for modern vehicles, sometimes too wide for anything that could have existed in the Neolithic. And they often intersect, overlap, creating networks that look more like spaghetti maps than logical paths. One of the most famous examples lies near the cliffs of Dingley. There, the ruts descend toward the edge and continue off the land, vanishing beneath the sea. Was the coastline different back then? Was sea level lower? Did the makers not anticipate erosion, or were the ruts never meant for transport at all? The theories are many, and they're all tantalizing. The simplest idea is the literal one, that these are actual cart tracks. Repeated use of wooden carts with solid wheels over soft limestone might have worn down the grooves over time. But here's the problem. Limestone is hard, and in some areas, the grooves are over 60 centimeters deep. That's not normal wear. That's geological surgery. Then there's the erosion theory, that the ruts were formed by water channels or natural processes. But if that were true, why are they always in pairs? Why so consistent in form yet so inconsistent in width? Other researchers argue they were ritual paths, pilgrimage routes, ceremonial processional lines connecting sacred sites. But even then, why carve them into bedrock? Why follow no logical start or end point? Some think the ruts were related to agriculture, tracks for sleds transporting goods, or markers for planting, or irrigation channels. But again, why so deep? Why so many? Then there's the timeline issue. Dating the ruts is nearly impossible. They were cut into stone, which doesn't give up carbon. Some may date to the Temple period, around 3000 BCE. Others might be later, even Bronze Age or Iron Age. Still, others could be much older, remnants of a vanished era when the landscape and maybe even the people were completely different. And let's not ignore the more fringe ideas that these were ancient runway systems, alien highways, or even prehistoric energy lines mapped and activated by unknowable technology. Sure, those theories live on the edge of credibility, but when faced with grooves that run straight off cliffs and under the sea, it's not hard to see how mystery breeds mythology. What's certain is this: the cart ruts defy classification. They are patterns without a known purpose, scars without a known wound. Like the fossilized footprints of a people who walked a different kind of logic, one we may never decode. And while the ruts twist and turn through Maltese limestone, half a world away lies a monument submerged beneath the sea, one that seems like a staircase to nowhere, a temple drowned in time, and a question chiseled into coral. Yonaguni Monument, Japan. Natural formation, modified bedrock, or lost architecture. Off the coast of Japan, near the tiny island of Yonaguni, divers discovered something unexpected in the 1,982nd, a vast, angular structure rising from the seabed, massive terraces, right angles, stair-like platforms. It looked man-made, it felt intentional, and it ignited one of the most controversial debates in underwater archaeology. Is the Yonaguni Monument a natural geological formation shaped by marine erosion? Or is it the ruin of a lost civilization swallowed by the ocean during the last ice age? The monument lies about 25 meters below the surface. It's massive, roughly 150 meters long and 40 wide, flat surfaces, sharp edges, step-like levels that seem too precise, too symmetrical, to be the work of chance. Proponents of the man-made theory point to features that resemble stairs, ramps, roads, and even what looks like a throne. Some claim to see carvings, faces, symbols, etched into the stone. Others suggest that the entire structure is a kind of ziggurat, or sunken temple, built thousands of years ago when sea levels were lower. And that's the tantalizing hook. Around 10,000 years ago, at the end of the last glacial period, global sea levels rose dramatically, Whole coastal regions were flooded. If Yonaguni was once above water, could it have been part of a prehistoric city, a Lemuria, an Atlantis? But critics push back hard. They argue the features can all be explained by natural fracturing in sedimentary rock. The sea, given enough time, can sculpt geometry. Sandstone splits in plains. Erosion creates ledges, sharp corners, even stair-like forms. It's nature's version of brutalist architecture. Still, the man-made camp holds its ground. Marine geologists and amateur explorers have mapped out the structure in painstaking detail. Some believe it includes a tunnel, a large entrance gate, and even a stage or altar. If true, that would make it the oldest known structure in the world by thousands of years. But here's the catch. There's no consensus. No artifacts have been found in direct association with the monument. No pottery, no tools, no bones, just rock. And the ocean is a poor archivist. Currents strip away clues. Coral grows. Life moves in. So the debate continues. Is it a geological marvel, a trick of perception, or the shattered pedestal of a civilization lost before history began? Whatever the answer, the Yonaguni Monument is a mirror. It reflects back our hopes, our myths, our hunger to find the missing chapters of our story. Whether it was made by hands or by tides, it remains a riddle resting beneath the waves. And speaking of enigmatic forms scattered across remote landscapes, we now leap from sea to stone into a field littered with ancient jars. Giant, hollow stone containers whose original use has been debated for generations, across a land soaked in both legend and war. Plain of jars, funerary installations, storage, or something broader across dozens of jar fields. In the misty uplands of central Laos, the landscape is littered with stone jars, not one or two, but thousands. Giant megalithic vessels, some weighing several tons, dot the countryside in clusters, like a forgotten army of urns left behind by giants. The Plain of Jars is one of the strangest and most haunting archaeological sites in Southeast Asia. Over 90 jar sites have been documented, with estimates of more than 2,000 individual jars. They vary in shape and size, but are all carved from solid rock. Some are squat and round, others are tall and thin, many are tilted, some have been shattered, a few still have lids. And no one knows, with certainty, why they're there. The most widely accepted theory is that they were part of ancient funerary practices. Human remains have been found in and around some of the jars, along with beads, ceramics, and burnt bone. Perhaps the jars were mortuary vessels used to hold the dead, or to ferment their bodies before final burial. But even within this theory, the details are muddy. Were the bodies placed inside the jars, or next to them? Were the jars sealed? Were they used for elite burials only, or was this a mass death ritual? Another theory suggests they were storage containers, for water, for rice wine, for grain, but this seems unlikely. The jars are scattered across inhospitable terrain, not near settlements or farms, and their massive size makes them impractical for regular storage. Some local legends claim the jars were made by giants to brew rice wine for a great victory celebration. Others say they were crafted by gods or by a vanished people with magical tools. And in a landscape still pockmarked by craters from 20th century bombings, the jars now stand as silent witnesses to both ancient and modern violence. Then there's the geographic mystery. Why here? Why this plateau? What social or religious system connected the jar fields into a cohesive landscape? Recent excavations have uncovered burial pits, stone discs, and associated artifacts that suggest a complex ritual purpose. Some researchers believe the jars were only one component in a larger ceremonial process, perhaps marking sacred zones where the living communed with the dead, or where souls were transformed before entering the afterlife. The jars, like tombstones, may have been part of a spiritual map, a Neolithic necropolis etched across the land. But the site is still largely unexplored. War and leftover ordnance have made excavation dangerous, Entire fields remain off-limits, shrouded in vegetation and memory. And so the jars remain silent, weathered, and stubbornly unexplained. Yet their mystery speaks clearly that even the simplest object a container can hold not just remains, but myth, not just function, but meaning. And from jars raised to the sky, we now turn to a circle drawn in the sand of the desert, the place where prehistoric astronomy may have first taken shape, not in Europe or the Americas, but in the blazing heart of ancient Africa. Nabta Playa, Sahara, earliest sky circle or pastoral ritual site. Alignment and intent remain debated. Long before the Egyptian pyramids scraped the desert sky, long before scribes etched hieroglyphs into limestone, and long before anyone whispered the name Ra, there was Nabta Playa. It lies deep in the Nubian desert of southern Egypt, now a desolate basin, scorched by the sun and scoured by wind, but 7,000 years ago, it was something else entirely. A lake, a seasonal waterhole, a gathering place for Neolithic pastoralists who lived in rhythm with the rain, the stars, and perhaps something more. Discovered in the 1972 and excavated more extensively in the decades since, Nabta Playa stunned archaeologists by revealing the remnants of a sophisticated prehistoric culture long before Egyptian dynasties began stacking stones. The most famous feature is a circle of standing stones, some upright, some fallen aligned in ways that don't seem random. Some point towards solstice sunrises or stellar events. Others form what may be the world's oldest astronomical alignment. Yes, the world's oldest. The site dates to around 5000 BCE, with some parts possibly as old as 7000 BCE. That's older than Stonehenge, older than Newgrange. This was a prehistoric Stonehenge in the Sahara built not by settled farmers, but by herders who moved with their cattle and the rains. So, what exactly is Nabta Playa? First theory, an early calendar. The standing stones may mark solstices, helping nomads predict seasonal rains and plan their movements. Survive the desert not with cities, but with cosmic timing. Second theory, a ritual complex. Associated finds include human burials, some of them richly adorned, as well as cattle bones in sacrificial pits. Some archaeologists believe the site reflects an early form of cosmology centered on cattle, ancestors, and the stars, a spiritual GPS pointing both upward and inward. And then there's the tantalizing possibility that Nabta Playa wasn't just a local site, but a cultural precursor to the grandeur of dynastic Egypt. The astronomical alignment, the symbolic burials, the cattle cult, all of these motifs echo into the Nile Valley centuries later. Did the knowledge born in the desert eventually inspire the monuments along the river? Yet despite the sophistication, the site raises a blunt contradiction. These were nomads, mobile, fluid. So why would they invest time and effort in building monuments? That's the paradox. Nabta Playa suggests that spiritual and astronomical knowledge didn't require cities. That monumentality didn't begin with farming, but perhaps with herding with the need to understand when and where to move. But over time, the rain stopped, the lake dried, the desert expanded, and the people of Nabta Playa vanished into history, leaving behind a ring of stones and the faint echo of sacred geometry. From the scorched sands of the Sahara, we now leap to a cooler plateau, one dotted with basalt, ringed with stone, and humming with secrets. The next site is less well known, but just as hypnotic. A stone riddle on the Golan Heights. Rujum el-Hiri, Golan. Why concentric stone rings were built on a basalt plateau? On the wild, windswept plains of the Golan Heights, nestled amid black basalt and scrub, lies a structure that from ground level looks like nothing much, a ruin, a tangle of rocks. But from above, everything changes. From the air, Rujum el-Hiri reveals itself as an enormous spiral, composed of concentric stone circles radiating outward from a central tomb. It is ancient. It is massive. It is strange. Known in Arabic as the Heap of the Wild Cat, Rouge el-Hiri is one of the oldest and most enigmatic megalithic sites in the Levant. Dated to around 3000 BCE, it spans more than 150 meters in diameter and includes over 42,000 tons of stone. The concentric rings rise and fall like fossilized ripples, carefully placed and meticulously layered. But what was it for? First, the burial. At the center lies a dolmen-like chamber, thought to be a tomb. But there's a catch. The tomb may have been added later. The rings predate it. This suggests the central burial wasn't the point. It was an afterthought. So, if not a tomb, then what? One possibility: an observatory. Like other Neolithic sites, Rouge el-Hiri may encode celestial knowledge. Some of the radial lines and gaps in the stone circles align with the solstices or equinoxes. Perhaps this was a place to watch the heavens, to mark time, to measure change, to predict what comes next. Others see it as a ceremonial center, a place where people gathered not to live, but to commune. The design suggests ritual procession, moving inward, circle by circle, toward a spiritual climax, a spiral pilgrimage into the heart of the earth. And then there's the acoustic possibility, an echo chamber of stone. The basalt blocks may have channeled or trapped sound in specific ways, amplifying chants or drumming. Imagine it. Twilight on the plateau, the sky bleeding red, the air thick with dust and prayer, a human spiral swirling inward, voice by voice. But here's the darker theory. Rouge el-Hiri as a place of death, not a tomb, but a sky burial site. Bodies exposed to the elements, birds, decay, transformation. The architecture channeling not just people, but spirits. Whatever its function, the labor involved was immense. This wasn't just a heap. It was engineered, aligned, built with purpose. But purpose for whom? That remains the enduring mystery. Was this a regional pilgrimage site? A tribal boundary marker? A monument to unity or division? There are no definitive answers. Just the shape, the silence, the enduring pull of stone laid by hands, now dust. And speaking of scale, we now cross an ocean to the American South, where earthen ridges and mounds rise not from stone, but from soil, a place where complexity flowered in ways no one expected, a prehistoric city with no metal, no writing, and no easy explanations. Poverty Point, Louisiana, ceremonial complex, trade nexus, calendar, or all of these? In the flat riverlands of northeastern Louisiana lies a site so massive, so elaborate, and so old that it should have rewritten American prehistory overnight. And yet, for many, Poverty Point remains a whisper, a mystery hidden in plain sight. Sprawling across more than 900 acres, Poverty Point was constructed between 1700 and 1000. 100 BCE, long before the rise of Mississippian cities like Cahokia, and long before the arrival of European colonizers. The site includes 6 massive, concentric earthwork ridges arranged in a crescent shape, several large platform mounds, and a 72-foot-tall central mound that towers over the flat delta landscape like a primeval ziggurat. And yet, the builders had no metal tools, no domesticated animals, no wheel, no pottery kilns. Just earth, hands, vision. The complexity is staggering. The concentric ridges, believed to have once held thousands of dwellings, were sculpted with baskets of soil, carried one at a time. The largest mound contains an estimated 238,000 cubic meters of earth. That's millions of basket loads. This wasn't casual. This was organized, communal construction on a massive scale. So what was it? First, the ceremonial theory. The alignment of mounds and ridges may have tracked celestial events, the solstices, equinoxes, or lunar cycles. Like a giant earthen calendar, Poverty Point could have served as a seasonal marker for ritual gatherings, agricultural planning, or spiritual observance. Then there's trade. Artifacts from Poverty Point include stone tools, beads, and ornaments made from materials sourced across thousands of miles, chert from the Midwest, soapstone from the Appalachians, and even copper from the Great Lakes. This was a hub, a prehistoric node in a vast trade web stretching across the continent. But Poverty Point wasn't a city in the traditional sense. There are few signs of long-term habitation. No large middens, no cemeteries, no signs of intense agriculture. It may have been a ceremonial gathering site, a place where people came together seasonally to trade, worship, build, and perhaps initiate the next generation. And here's what makes it really weird. There's almost no evidence of hierarchy, no king's palace, no elite burials. Whoever built this didn't leave behind statues of rulers or emblems of conquest. They left geometry, circles, alignments, shared labor, collective monumentality. That flips the usual script. We're used to big architecture, meaning big empires, pharaohs, kings, priests. But Poverty Point suggests something different: complexity without coercion, organization without oppression, an egalitarian society capable of grand design. And then around 1100 BCE it ends. The site is abandoned. No war, no disaster, just silence. Poverty Point remains one of the most compelling prehistoric enigmas in the Americas. A city that wasn't a city. A temple with no god. A monument to human connection and cosmic order, and perhaps a warning that even the grandest constructions can be forgotten. And just as a snake coils and strikes, so too does the next mystery. We move from circles and mounds to a serpent slithering through the Ohio earth, an effigy carved into the land, whose message may still be alive under the soil. Great Serpent Mound, Ohio. Which culture built it, and what the sinuous effigy encoded? In the heartland of Ohio, curled atop a ridge overlooking Brush Creek, slithers one of the most spellbinding and baffling earthworks in North America, the Great Serpent Mound. Over 1,300 feet long, coiling in 7 graceful curves, with an open mouth aimed directly at a giant oval, possibly an egg, or maybe the sun, or something else entirely. It's an ancient monument that almost no one agrees on, not its builders, not its date, not its meaning. Just the fact of its existence is staggering. The body of the serpent is perfectly formed, undulating like it's mid-strike. The tail coils into a triple spiral. The head is shaped and oriented with astronomical precision, possibly aligned with the summer solstice sunset. Some believe the egg-shaped feature in its jaws marks a solar event. Others think it's symbolic of birth, renewal, or consumption. But the deeper question is, who built it? That's where things get murky. The Serpent Mound was first thought to be Adena, an ancient mound-building culture active in the Ohio Valley around 1000 BCE. Nearby burial mounds fit the Adena profile, and radiocarbon dating of charcoal found at the site seemed to support this. But later, tests threw a wrench in the theory. In 1996, radiocarbon dating of materials taken directly from the serpent's body suggested a much later date, closer to 1070 CE, placing it in the Fort Ancient period. That's 1,000 years later. A totally different cultural context. So, was it built by the Fort Ancient people? Was it a reworking of an earlier Adena structure? Or are both interpretations wrong, and the builders remain unnamed, another forgotten civilization whose legacy wins invisibly through our archaeological gaps? Then there's the design itself. Serpent imagery is powerful in indigenous traditions across North America, symbolizing everything from fertility and rebirth to chaos and destruction. In many myths, serpents are guardians of the underworld, or they're sky spirits, creatures that embody rivers, lightning, and transformation. This isn't just an artistic flourish. It's a spiritual statement rendered in the very skin of the land. And the placement is no accident. The mound sits on a plateau formed by a meteor impact millions of years ago. Coincidence? Maybe. But to the ancient builders, that geology might have felt charged. Sacred. A place where sky had once struck earth. But for all its grandeur, the Serpent Mound isn't a burial site. No bones, no grave goods. It wasn't made to house the dead, but perhaps to speak to them, or to something. Some believe it was an astronomical calendar. Its curves may align with solstice sunsets, lunar standstills, and star risings. If so, it wasn't just a serpent, it was a clock, a snake made of time. Others see it as a ritual site, maybe for healing, maybe for vision quests, maybe a theater of transformation, where initiates walked the curves as part of a symbolic death and rebirth. And then, there's the possibility that we're simply looking at it wrong, that we flattened a sacred metaphor into mere geometry. What if the Serpent Mound was meant to be seen from the sky? A message to the heavens, a warning, a greeting, a story. Whatever the truth, the Serpent Mound remains coiled in silence. A mystery not just of architecture, but of identity, both its own and that of its long-vanished creators. And from the serpent's winding body, we now swing into the heart of the Amazon, where vast, hidden patterns emerge, not in soil mounds, but in the negative space of the rainforest canopy. A forgotten geometry etched in earth, only visible once the jungle began to give up its secrets. Amazonian geoglyphs, earthworks hidden by forest, settlement planning, ritual landscapes, or agroecological markers. For centuries, the Amazon was seen as untouched wilderness, an endless green ocean of primal chaos. The idea of complex, ancient civilizations thriving under the canopy was dismissed as fantasy. Too infertile, they said, too wild. But then, the trees began to vanish. As deforestation advanced, satellite imagery and aerial surveys started revealing something astonishing. Geometric patterns etched into the earth, massive squares, circles, lines, and enclosures. Some were nearly the size of football fields, and they were everywhere. These are the Amazonian geoglyphs. Hundreds of them have been found so far, mainly in the Brazilian state of Acre. But that's just the beginning. As more forest is cleared, more glyphs appear. What they suggest is nothing less than a complete rewriting of Amazonian prehistory. These weren't scattered bands of foragers. These were organized, networked societies, urban planners, earth sculptors, astronomers maybe, farmers, definitely. So what were the geoglyphs for? The obvious guess is ritual. Their forms, circles, squares, complex interlocking patterns seem too precise for utility alone. Some contain ditches, walls, platforms. Possibly used for ceremonies, dances, astronomical observations. They may have served as communal spaces for dispersed populations, like prehistoric fairgrounds or open-air cathedrals. Another theory posits them as part of settlement infrastructure, not just symbolic but functional, marking territorial boundaries, anchoring seasonal camps, organizing trade routes. The geometry might reflect social structure, a map of how people saw themselves in relation to each other and the cosmos. Then there's the agricultural angle. Some geoglyphs are surrounded by dark, fertile soil known as terra preta, black earth. This soil didn't occur naturally. It was engineered a blend of charcoal, bone, compost, and pottery shards. It retained nutrients. It supported intensive cultivation. It spread. That flips the narrative of the Amazon as a green desert. These weren't fragile hunter-gatherers. They were landscape managers. They terraformed their world not with machines, but with fire, soil, and symbiosis. But here's the kicker. Most of these geoglyphs are dated between 2,000 and 650 years ago. That means they were still in use when Europeans arrived. But the diseases that followed, smallpox, measles, wiped out up to 90% of indigenous populations before any real contact. By the time chroniclers arrived, the builders were gone. So when the jungle grew back, it didn't reclaim wilderness, it erased civilization. And now that civilization is re-emerging, scar by scar, from the soil. Yet, for all we know, the true number of geoglyphs may be in the tens of thousands. Most remain buried beneath the trees. Which means the Amazon isn't just a rainforest, it's a library. One where the books are written in dirt and only visible when the canopy is torn away. And if these massive glyphs hint at an invisible network, our next mystery is even more confounding. A system of roads in the desert that lead not to cities, but to nowhere, or everywhere. A sacred grid etched into stone and silence. Nazca lines, pilgrimage pathways, water, ceremonial signaling, or sky markers. Southern Peru. A desert so dry it looks like the sun gave up on it millennia ago. Flat, brittle, scorched. And across this parched canvas, stretching for miles, lie the Nazca Line's massive geoglyphs etched into the earth. Some are simple lines, others are geometric patterns. Then come the animals, the spider, the monkey, the hummingbird, the giant condor. They're so vast you can't even grasp them from the ground. Only from the air do they resolve into shapes some hundreds of feet across. And therein lies the first enigma. They were made by people who had no way to see them. Or did they? The Nazca Lines were created by removing the top layer of oxidized desert soil, revealing the lighter clay beneath. The technique was simple. The vision? Anything but. There are over 800 straight lines, 300 geometric figures, and 70 stylized animals and plants. Some stretch over 9 miles. So, what were they for? One theory suggests they were ritual pathways. Many of the lines are designed to be walked. Pilgrims may have traced their way along them as part of ceremonial processions, following symbolic routes to sacred sites or celestial alignments. Others believe they were astronomical calendars. Certain lines appear to align with solstices, lunar standstills, and star risings. Maybe they were markers. Maybe they were prayers carved into the land. Another theory dives deeper literally. The Nazca Desert is bone dry, but underground aquifers and ancient water systems lie beneath. Some believe the lines were dowsing diagrams, or even giant spiritual offerings to the gods of rain and fertility. The shapes, many of them animals associated with water, might have symbolized the flow of life below. And then, there's the sky. The fact that the lines are only truly visible from above has led to wild speculation. Were the Nazca communicating with the heavens, sending messages to the gods? Or was flight a real possibility? Balloons, kites, high platforms, tools now lost to time? Yet the biggest question remains unanswered. Why such scale? Why spend generations scraping the desert to build images no one could see? Unless seeing wasn't the point. Maybe the act of making them together was the purpose, a spiritual collective ritual, a binding myth etched not in story, but in geography. And though the Nazca Lines endure, the culture that made them faded. Whether through climate collapse, deforestation, or conquest, the voices behind the glyphs have gone silent. And yet, their marks remain, still perfect, still defiant, still unexplained. From giant drawings on desert plains, we now shift to the roads that lead out of nowhere, across canyons and cliffs, not for wagons or warriors, but for something else entirely. A network of lines so vast and so precise, they seem to have been made for walking gods. Chaco Canyon's roads transport arteries or ritual processional lines to great houses. In the bone-dry heart of northwestern New Mexico, a canyon splits through the desert like a wound left by time. Its cliffs are cracked and sun-bleached. Its mesas echo with silence. And in its center lies one of the most astonishing urban planning feats of prehistoric North America, Chaco Canyon. Between 850 and 1250 CE, The ancestral Puebloans built a constellation of monumental structures here, great houses of multi-story stone masonry, complete with kivas, circular ceremonial rooms, plazas, and towers. These weren't scattered dwellings. This was intentional design, architecturally aligned with solstices and lunar cycles. But what truly stretches the imagination are the roads. Chacoan roads radiate out from the canyon like spokes on a wheel, long, straight, and strange. They run across cliffs, cut through mesas, and defy topography in ways that don't make sense for trade or transport. Some stretch over 50 miles with barely a bend, and they're wide up to 30 feet across, paved in parts, and often flanked by low berms. But here's the rub. Many of them go nowhere. No towns at the ends, no farmlands. Just stone lines etched across a barren, windswept landscape. So, what were they for? One idea is utilitarian. These were roads for transporting goods, timber, turquoise, pottery between Chaco and outlying communities. But that theory collapses under scrutiny. Why build straight roads up cliffs when gentler paths exist? Why cut stairways into canyon walls if efficiency was the goal? That leads to the second, and more likely theory. These were processional roads, ceremonial arteries. Paths walked not by traders, but by priests, pilgrims, dancers moving in sacred rhythm toward the great houses of Chaco. Archaeological evidence supports this. The roads are aligned with astronomical events. Some point directly toward the solstice sunrises or moonrise standstills. Others connect ritual sites across vast distances, mapping a spiritual geography onto the land. And then there are the kivas, subterranean ceremonial chambers often linked to cosmological symbolism. Imagine processions along the roads, converging on these sacred spaces, echoing with drums and chants under the open desert sky. Some roads even pass by or lead to rock art panels, cliff shrines, or isolated outposts. They weren't just routes, they were stories. Pathways of memory and myth, walked year after year until the very earth remembered them. But something happened. Around 1250 CE, Chacoan society collapsed. The great houses were abandoned. The roads were left to the wind. Climate change, social upheaval, or spiritual transformation, take your pick. Today, many of the roads are barely visible, seen only by satellite or aerial survey. They are vanishing lines, fading into dust. And yet, they whisper, not of trade, but of ritual, not of transport, but of meaning. And if Chaco's roads were walked by spirits in sacred geometry, the next mystery is a city with no fortifications, no weapons, and no pottery, just monumental silence. We head south now, to a desert where civilization bloomed against the odds. Caral Sup, how cities without ceramics or obvious warfare arose, and why they waned. In the Sup Valley of coastal Peru, about 120 miles north of Lima, lies a city so old it was building pyramids when Egypt was still thinking about pharaohs, Caral, a metropolis from the mists of prehistory, a city that bloomed in a desert and then vanished. Caral dates to around 2600 BCE, making it the oldest known city in the Americas. 6 monumental pyramids, amphitheaters, sunken plazas. A planned urban layout that hints at complex social organization. All of it constructed without metal tools, without wheels, and most bafflingly without ceramics. Let that sink in. A city with no pottery, no weaponry, no defensive walls, no signs of conquest, just massive architecture, musical instruments, and burnt offerings. So, how did it happen? One theory centers on trade. Caral sat in a nexus between coast and highlands, and may have thrived by facilitating the exchange of cotton, used for fishing nets, dried fish, fruits, and medicinal plants. The people of Caral didn't need to conquer because they controlled the flow. Another theory suggests the society was built around ritual. The pyramids and plazas were not palaces but temples. Excavations have revealed altars, ceremonial fires, and offerings of seashells and feathers. Music was central. Archaeologists found flutes made from condor and pelican bones. This was not a city of warlords. It was a city of priests. And yet, for all its grandeur, Caral left behind no writing, no glyphs, just stones, bones, and geometry. And that's perhaps the greatest mystery, a civilization advanced enough to build pyramids but silent on who they were. Then, around 1800 BCE, it declined. The reasons remain unclear. Environmental stress is likely evidence of prolonged droughts and river shifts, but perhaps the ideology changed. Perhaps the very rituals that built Caral eventually became irrelevant, or forgotten. Whatever the cause, Caral's story challenges our assumptions. It tells us cities don't need kings, conquest, or conflict, that you can build a complex society on trade, music, and shared belief, that civilization isn't just war and empire, it can be harmony too. And as we leave the desert pyramids behind, we arrive at a river valley thousands of miles away, a place where a whole culture was swallowed by flood, where the walls came down, not in battle, but underwater. Liangju's collapse. China megafloods likely, but how social-ecological stress cascaded is unclear. In the Yangtze River delta of eastern China, not far from the bustle of modern Hangzhou, lies the ghost of a lost kingdom, Liangju, a Neolithic culture that rose with remarkable sophistication only to disappear beneath the waters, leaving its jade treasures and hydraulic genius buried in mud. Dating from around 3,300 to 2,300 BCE, Liangju was not a single site, but a civilization, over 300 settlements spread across the region. The centerpiece was a walled city with palaces, ceremonial platforms, and the remains of complex urban planning. But what truly set Liangju apart wasn't just the jade masks, the elaborate burials, or the finely carved ritual axes. It was the waterworks. Liangju built dams, canals, reservoirs, a vast hydraulic system, possibly the oldest large-scale water management system in the world. They controlled floods, irrigated fields, tamed the wetlands. The people of Liangju didn't fight the water, they mastered it. Until, suddenly, they didn't. Around 2300 BCE, the entire civilization collapsed. Settlements were abandoned. The grand city was submerged in silt. For centuries, Liangju became a whisper, a culture referenced in myth but dismissed by scholars as legend. Then came the rediscovery. In the 20th century, excavations unearthed jade artifacts of stunning complexity, stone foundations, and eventually, the remains of the city itself preserved under flood deposits. The question was obvious. What happened? The dominant theory is a mega-flood, possibly triggered by extreme monsoonal rains or the failure of their own dams. Geological layers show evidence of widespread inundation. But a flood alone doesn't explain everything. Liangju was a society that knew water, which raises other questions. Did the flood come too fast? Was the damage to infrastructure irreversible? Or was the collapse social, triggered by internal conflict, resource depletion, or belief systems unable to adapt to a changing climate? Some scholars point to the fragility of complexity. The more sophisticated a society becomes, the more vulnerable it is to cascading failures. One broken dam, one shift in rainfall, one failed harvest, and the system buckles. Others suggest a spiritual crisis. Liangju's jade artifacts were not utilitarian, they were sacred. If the gods of water turned against them, maybe the people lost faith. Maybe the very belief system that built the civilization also contributed to its undoing. Today, the ruins lie beneath fields and cities, quietly reminding us that power over nature is temporary, that no amount of jade or engineering can guarantee survival when the rain doesn't stop. And as the floodwaters rose in Liangju, elsewhere in the world, a different kind of storm was brewing, not natural, but human. A conflict so brutal and organized, it rewrote the story of Bronze Age Europe. A battlefield frozen in time. A river valley turned killing field. Tollense Valley Battle. Who fought this massive Bronze Age conflict, and why here? Northern Germany, Tollense Valley. A quiet, green stretch of river and wetlands. Idyllic, peaceful. But beneath the soil lies a battlefield that rewrote the history of European prehistory. A war so large, so brutal, so organized, that for a long time, archaeologists refused to believe it was real. The Tollense Valley battle site, dated to around 1250 BCE, is the oldest known large-scale battle in Europe. And by large, we mean something different from the tribal skirmishes previously assumed to define the Bronze Age. This was not a village raid. This was a bloodbath. The site was discovered accidentally in the late 20th century, when construction work turned up human bones with signs of violent trauma. Investigations followed, and then the floodgates opened. So far, archaeologists have recovered the remains of at least 140 individuals, young men mostly, many with crushed skulls, broken arms, arrowheads lodged in bones, and blunt force trauma consistent with maces and axes, horse remains, wooden clubs, bronze weapons, some with decorative inlays, and bronze pins from distant regions, suggesting warriors came from far and wide. The scale? Estimated 4,000 combatants. That's huge for the time. Picture that. Thousands of warriors converging in a river valley, clashing in organized formations, using coordinated tactics and weaponry. But why? And who? The short answer, we don't know. The long answer is, we don't even know what we don't know. No written records survive. The battle predates widespread literacy in the region. The fighters left no monuments, no trophies, just bones and silence. But from the bones, we infer things. Some theories suggest the battle was part of a larger conflict over trade. Tollense Valley would have been a strategic corridor linking the Baltic Sea to the interior. Control over this route might have meant control over amber, tin, salt, and other critical Bronze Age commodities. Other scholars propose political motives. Maybe this was a war of unification or resistance. A last stand of decentralized tribes against an emerging regional power. The presence of elite weaponry, swords, daggers, arrowheads made of imported bronze, suggests some fighters were high-status individuals, not peasant conscripts. And then there's the geography. The battle happened in a choke point, a river crossing. That implies ambush, strategy. Someone was thinking tactically. But here's the mind-bending part. This battle predates the commonly accepted timeline for complex warfare in Europe. For decades, the assumption was that Bronze Age Europe was decentralized, local chiefs. Occasional conflict. No organized military units. Tollense shattered that illusion. It's like discovering a medieval battlefield in the middle of a supposedly peaceful Stone Age. And the weapons tell a story too. Wood-shafted arrows with bronze tips, clubs crafted for lethality. Some wounds show signs of attempted healing. Others are lethal on impact. This was not chaos. This was warfare. And it's likely just one part of a broader tapestry. What if Tollense wasn't an anomaly, but a glimpse of a lost era of continental struggle? What other Bronze Age conflicts lie buried under farms and fields, unexcavated and forgotten? Tollense is a battlefield frozen in time, a prehistoric Gettysburg, a place where unknown armies clashed for reasons we may never fully know, but whose bones tell us that even in the so-called dawn of civilization, violence already cast a long shadow. And speaking of destruction by design, our next mystery isn't about battle, but fire. a whole culture that burned their own homes, over and over. As if fire wasn't destruction but ritual. Welcome to the paradox of Trypillia. Cucuteni-Trypillia, burned houses, ritual closure, sanitation after epidemics, or pragmatic rebuilding cycles. Across Ukraine, Moldova, and Romania, the ruins of one of Europe's most enigmatic Neolithic cultures stretch like a slow-moving wildfire across the soil. The Cucuteni-Trypillia people, settled agriculturalists, master potters, builders of some of the largest prehistoric settlements ever found, some housing thousands of people, long before Rome, long before Athens. And they had a bizarre habit. They burned their houses, systematically, entire villages, again and again. Archaeologists have excavated Trypillia sites that show clear layers of occupation, each layer ending in deliberate conflagration. Whole homes, charred, clay floors fired into ceramic. The wooden superstructures turned to ash. It wasn't accidental, it was cultural. So why did they do it? Theory 1. Ritual closure. Perhaps burning a house marked the end of a life cycle, a symbolic death, a spiritual reset. You don't just move out, you burn it down. Purification by flame. Theory 2. Sanitation. Burning houses may have been an early form of epidemic control. In a world with no antibiotics and no knowledge of pathogens, fire was a reliable cleanser. If disease spread through a household, flame might have been the safest solution. Theory 3. Practical rebuilding. Some scholars argue that the Trypillians built homes that naturally decayed after a few decades. Rather than repair, they tore down and burned, then rebuilt on top. A literal tabula rasa. But there's a pattern that's harder to explain. These weren't just individual house fires. Entire settlements were burned simultaneously. Villages that had stood for decades, erased in a single ritual act. That suggests something deeper. A communal event. A spiritual necessity. And the settlements themselves were massive. For a people with no known written language, the level of organization is shocking. Settlements were laid out in concentric rings, central communal spaces, pathways, storage zones. It was urban planning before cities existed. The Trypillians also produced extraordinary ceramics painted in black, red, and white spirals, animal motifs, geometric precision. Some suggest the pottery wasn't just functional, it was symbolic, holding stories, myths, cosmology. But here's the punchline. Despite their sophistication, they vanished. Around 3000 BCE, the Trypillia culture disappeared. Whether due to environmental stress, invasion, internal collapse, or religious transformation, we don't know. All that remains are their pots, their rings of ash, their silence. And perhaps the most haunting image is this: a people who marked time not in calendars, but in fire. Who didn't preserve, but purged. Who understood that endings weren't failures, but necessary chapters. And if Trypillia's ashes speak of closure, the next mystery shimmers with gold wealth buried with the dead, inequality written in metal, and a sudden surge of opulence that still gleams across the Black Sea. Varna Necropolis, Bulgaria, earliest gold and stark inequality. What powered that sudden wealth and its decline? Bulgaria, 1972. A tractor digging a trench near the city of Varna uncovers something shimmering in the dirt. Not just bones, but gold. Lots of it. More than 6 kilos, distributed among over 300 graves. Some skeletons draped in necklaces, bracelets, scepters. Others nearly bare. The Varna necropolis had been found, and with it, one of the most staggering revelations of prehistoric Europe. Dated to around 4600–4200 BCE, the Varna necropolis is the world's oldest known site of gold metallurgy. That alone is astonishing. But the deeper shock is what the gold represents: an explosion of social stratification at a time we thought was still egalitarian. Because here's the thing. Before Varna, the Neolithic world was mostly flat in terms of wealth. Shared land, shared labor, shared burials. But at Varna, we see hierarchy, and it is blatant. One grave in particular, Grave 43, contained a male skeleton adorned with over 1,500 gold items. Necklaces, pendants, weapons, even a golden penis sheath. This wasn't a warrior. There were no signs of violence. He was likely a priest-king, a religious or political figure whose body became a monument to inequality. Other graves, by contrast, were modest. Some contained just a few trinkets. Some, none at all. And among the most richly adorned were symbolic graves. No bodies, just gold. Cenotaphs to power. Status without flesh. What caused this sudden wealth? Theories abound. Varna was near rich copper deposits. The people may have controlled trade networks stretching across the Balkans and into Anatolia. This was a hub both economic and spiritual. The gold wasn't just currency, it was ideology. But the culture didn't last. Within a few centuries, the Varna complex vanished. Was it collapse, climate, rebellion against inequality? Or simply migration, assimilation, absorption into broader cultural shifts? One thing's clear. Varna marks the first glittering crack in humanity's mirror. The moment we started burying our dead in different clothes, on different tiers of the afterlife ladder. Gold is beautiful, but at Varna, it is also loud. It says, this person mattered more. This body was sacred. This man had power. And once gold entered the story, it never left. And as Varna's golden dead gleam in museum glass, we now descend into the deep forests of Russia's Ural Mountains, where a single wooden idol twice as old as the pyramid stands with its carved faces and zigzag secrets, staring across the millennia like a god no one remembers. Shigir Idol, Urals, the meaning of its zigzags and faces, on a 12,000-year-old wooden monument. Buried deep beneath the peat bogs of the Ural Mountains, preserved in an oxygen-starved tomb of acidic water and moss, the Shigir Idol was unearthed in 1894 like something summoned from a forgotten mythology. At nearly 12 feet tall, carved from a single larch tree, it is the oldest known wooden sculpture in the world, more than twice the age of the Egyptian pyramids. Radiocarbon dating puts its creation around 10,000 BCE, making it over 12,000 years old. That's Mesolithic. That's post-Ice Age. That's humanity just learning to breathe again. And it is covered, saturated in carvings. Faces, geometric patterns, hands, eyes, zigzag lines. It's like staring at a Neolithic codex in an alien language, etched into timber by a people with no writing system, no cities, no metal, just time, wood, and vision. So, what were they saying? Some of the motifs are familiar. Eyes within diamonds, serpent-like lines, patterns that could signify water, danger, transformation, but others remain opaque. The faces are stacked vertically, staring out from different sides of the idol as if watching in all directions, or from different layers of existence. One theory posits that the idol was a cosmological map, each tier representing a different level of the universe: underworld, earth, sky. The faces may have been ancestral spirits, or gods, or something in between. Another interpretation sees it as a totemic record, an ancestral lineage recorded not in names, but in symbols. A wooden family tree, quite literally. Then there's the idea of taboo. Some researchers argue that the zigzags might indicate danger or forbidden knowledge. Others see it as a kind of code, possibly linked to shamanic trance states. Symbols not meant to be read, but felt understood through altered consciousness. But the most haunting part of the Shigir Idol is not its form. It's what it implies: symbolic, abstract thinking at a time when humans were still transitioning from hunter-gatherer chaos to structured living. This was not doodling. This was culture. This was a message carried forward through a forest of millennia. And think about this. Wood decays. Always. If the idol hadn't been preserved by the bog's unique chemistry, it would have rotted to nothing centuries ago. Which begs the question, how many other Shigir-like monuments were made and lost? How many prehistoric wooden masterpieces turned to mulch before they could be found? We treat stone as the cornerstone of ancient memory because it survives. But the Shigir Idol proves that memory was once carved in trees. That the earliest stories were not just etched into mountains, but into trunks, forests, living things. And what stories they must have been. As the Shigir Idol silently endures behind museum glass, we move from wood to stone again, this time to carvings that span an entire continent. Grooves, rings, hollows etched into boulders and cliff faces. Art that seems to mean everything and nothing. Cup and ring marks, Europe-wide rock art, whose symbolism is still opaque. Across the highlands of Scotland, the moors of Ireland, the ridges of Spain, the fields of northern Italy and beyond, ancient rocks bear the same strange marks, shallow cup-shaped depressions, often surrounded by one or more concentric circles. Sometimes there are radial lines, sometimes spirals, sometimes the marks stand alone. Other times they appear in clusters, overlapping like a gallery of Neolithic graffiti. These are the cup and ring marks. And they are everywhere. Some are out in the open, exposed to the wind and rain for thousands of years. Others are hidden beneath earth, only discovered during construction or plowing. And they all raise the same impossible question. What do they mean? They appear in regions separated by hundreds, even thousands of miles, across cultures, across centuries, and yet the motif remains stubbornly consistent: cups, rings, lines. Theory 1. They're maps. Some believe the patterns represent landscape features, rivers, hills, or settlements. The grooves could be directional guides, the rings, boundaries, or gathering places. Primitive cartography etched in stone. Theory 2. They're religious or spiritual. The repetition of the cup and ring motif might symbolize portals to the underworld, or celestial bodies, or stages of life and death. Some are located near burial sites, further suggesting funerary significance. Theory 3. They're mnemonic devices, early memory tools. Maybe each cup and ring was a story, a family lineage, a historical record encoded in visual shorthand. But they resist easy interpretation. Many are in locations with no obvious strategic or ritual purpose. Slabs of rock with no view, no water, no burial nearby. Why would anyone spend hours or days carving a pattern into a rock on the side of a hill that nobody ever visits? Then there's the method. The carvings were made using hammerstones and chisels, painstakingly pecked into rock over long periods of time. This wasn't idle carving. This was effort, intention. Some of the marks have weathered into near invisibility, while others remain crisp, but all of them whisper the same defiance. I'm still here. You still don't understand. And maybe that's the point. Maybe they were meant to be just out of reach. Sacred symbols not for everyone, but for the initiated, the elders, the dead. The cup and ring phenomenon could represent a pan-European symbolic language, one we haven't cracked. One that never had a dictionary, or perhaps it was never about language at all. Maybe it was about action, about doing the carving, participating in a ritual that left a mark, carving permanence into a world that offered none. And if these abstract etchings leave us reeling, our next mystery cuts even deeper into the edge of what we call writing. Symbols carved into clay long before the first alphabets, not quite language, not quite art. A script that defies classification. Vinča symbols and Tartaria tablets. Proto-writing, notation, or just decoration. In southeastern Europe, from the plains of Serbia to the valleys of Romania, the remnants of the Vinča culture have unearthed one of the most tantalizing mysteries of the Neolithic world. A system of symbols engraved on pottery, figurines, and tablets that may represent one of the earliest forms of writing on Earth. The Vinča civilization, thriving between 5,500 and 4,500 BCE, was ahead of its time. Large settlements, metallurgy, organized architecture, even early forms of urban planning. But what truly sets them apart are the marks hundreds of unique signs found repeatedly across a wide geographic area. And at the center of this enigma are the Tartaria tablets, 3 small clay pieces discovered in Romania in 1961. One of them is rectangular, covered in etched symbols. Another is round, bearing what looks like a proto-solar motif. The third is inscribed with lines that some scholars swear resemble Sumerian pictographs. But here's the catch. They predate Sumer by nearly 1,000 years. So, what are we looking at? One interpretation is that these are forms of proto-writing, not a full linguistic system, but an early symbolic code used for ritual, administration, or both. The repetition of certain symbols suggests they had meaning, consistent, replicable meaning. That's the backbone of language. But others argue that's wishful thinking. Perhaps the symbols are religious icons meant to convey metaphysical truths, not phonetic ones. Or maybe they were visual shorthand for social roles, clan identifiers, or property markers. And still others say the symbols are decorative, patterned designs for aesthetic pleasure with no deeper semantic content. But that doesn't explain the consistency. Similar symbols appear across hundreds of sites on different types of artifacts, used by different people. There's a system here. Whether it was used for recording stories, transactions, prayers, or cosmic formulas, we don't know. Adding to the mystery is the burial where the Tartaria tablets were found. Alongside them were bones of an adult woman believed to be a priestess or shaman. Some claim the bones were ritually boiled before burial. The tablets may have been part of a sacred rite. That's not everyday bookkeeping, that's sacred text. And then there's the location. This region, long considered peripheral to Mesopotamia, may have birthed a script of its own. If the Vinča symbols truly represent writing, it would push back the origins of literacy by centuries and rewrite the geography of invention. But no consensus exists, no translation, no key, just marks on clay, ancient, deliberate, and frustratingly mute. And as we stare at these symbols from the edge of comprehension, we prepare to cross continents into the sands of North America, where the timeline of human migration has just been cracked wide open. Not by stone or bone, but by footprints left behind like echoes in the earth. Indus script. Is it full writing? What language is encoded? And how can it be deciphered? In the scorching plains and monsoon-drenched valleys of the Indian subcontinent, once stood the Indus Valley civilization, one of the world's earliest urban cultures. Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Tolavira, names that conjure images of meticulously planned streets, sewage systems ahead of their time, and trade stretching from Mesopotamia to the Arabian Sea. But amid the bricks and granaries lies the true enigma, the Indus script. Found on thousands of small objects, seals, pottery, tools, and tablets. These tiny inscriptions are made of short strings of symbols, sometimes no more than 5 or 6 in a row. Etched with razor precision, they're tantalizing in their uniformity, elegant in their economy. Yet despite over a century of study, the Indus script remains undeciphered. No Rosetta Stone. No bilingual texts, just the same compact lines repeating across thousands of years. So what are we looking at? Possibility 1, a full writing system. Some scholars argue the script represents a phonetic language, comparable to Sumerian cuneiform or Egyptian hieroglyphs. The consistency of symbol use, placement, and combinations across vast geographical and temporal distances supports this view. But there's a problem: length. The inscriptions are short, too short for narrative text. Most are under 10 symbols long, often fewer than 5. That's not a lot to go on. Without longer passages, deciphering meaning is like trying to learn a language by reading license plates. Which brings us to possibility 2, proto-writing. Maybe the symbols don't represent language directly but encode information visually like inventory tags, trademarks, or ritual tokens. They might convey ownership, identity, profession, or religious function, much like logos or pictographic shorthand. But even then, the system seems more complex than a simple code. Certain symbols always appear first, others never occur together. There are apparent grammatical rules, structure, syntax. That smells like language. Then there's the burning question. What language are they encoding? Some researchers propose a Dravidian root, an ancient ancestor of Tamil or Kannada. Others argue for a now lost linguistic isolate, an entire tongue with no surviving relatives. Still others suggest links to Munda languages or even distant ties to Elamite or early Indo-Aryan dialects. But without a bilingual inscription or contextual clues, every guess is a shot in the dark. The Indus script sits in a closed box. We can see the shape, but not the contents. And yet, the people who used it clearly thought it was meaningful. The seals weren't casual doodles. They were stamped, standardized, widely distributed. That kind of cultural investment doesn't happen unless the script mattered. The script's symbols include human figures, animals, especially the iconic unicorn bull, and geometric shapes. Some are abstract, others highly stylized. Whether they represented names, prayers, trade items, or divine codes, they formed a network of information now lost to silence. Today, the Indus script is a Rorschach test for archaeologists, a symbol system that invites theory, resists proof, and remains defiantly mute. Its mystery is not that we don't understand it, it's that we still might never understand it. And as we leave behind this puzzle of clay and meaning, we travel forward in time but back in the human timeline to footprints left in New Mexico mud that appended the most fundamental assumption of the Americas as prehistory. First Americans timeline. Human footprints at White Sands push presence. Back 23,000 years. Reigniting root debates. For decades, the peopling of the Americas followed a tidy narrative. Around 13,000 years ago, small groups of humans crossed the Bering Land Bridge from Siberia into Alaska, then moved south through an ice-free corridor into the heart of the continent. They were the Clovis culture big game hunters, fluted spear points, mammoth killers. Except that story? It's unraveling. In 2021, scientists published a stunning find from White Sands National Park in New Mexico. Fossilized human footprints, preserved in ancient lakebed sediments, dated to approximately 23,000 years ago. 23,000. That's 10,000 years before Clovis. At the time, glaciers still blanketed much of North America. The so-called ice-free corridor was closed. According to the old model, humans shouldn't have been there. But the footprints don't care about our models. They're real. Dozens of them. Adults, teenagers, even children. Some walking in straight lines, others running. One tiny set appears to double back, as if the child had slipped or changed course. These aren't symbolic. They're not abstract. They are presence. Time, frozen in stride. So what does it mean? It means the first Americans were here long before we thought. And if they were in New Mexico 23,000 years ago, they must have arrived in the Americas even earlier. Maybe 25,000. Maybe more. This forces us to reconsider migration routes. If the northern ice corridors were blocked, then maybe people came by boat coasting down the Pacific shoreline in small watercraft, exploiting marine resources, skirting the glaciers. It also suggests the Clovis first model is not just wrong, it was a historical dead end. Clovis may not have been the first American culture, but rather one of many regional traditions that flourished and died over millennia. And this isn't just about White Sands. Other early sites, like Buttermilk Creek in Texas or Monte Verde in Chile, have been challenging the orthodoxy for years. But footprints are different. They're visceral, immediate. They're not shaped tools or fragments of bone. They are direct evidence of people moving across the land. The dating, of course, has been challenged, always. Critics point to contamination, stratigraphy errors, misinterpretation of seeds used in radiocarbon tests. But so far, the evidence holds. And more footprints keep being found. What makes it even more poetic is the sheer ordinariness of the scene. These were not warriors or priests. They weren't building cities. They were walking, possibly carrying loads, kids trailing behind. A moment in deep time that would have vanished forever, if not for the perfect conditions of silt and Sunday. The White Sands discovery doesn't just rewrite timelines. It destabilizes the whole premise of discovery. It reminds us that the land was never empty, that the story didn't start with Clovis or Columbus, that humans were here, long before we started naming cultures or drawing maps. And if footsteps in sand can outlast glaciers and empires, then maybe truth buried long enough can rise too. And now we follow those early steps further south, farther than anyone imagined, to a boggy site in Chile that shattered the Clovis first doctrine decades before White Sands ever made headlines. Monte Verde, Chile, the pre-Clovis site that changed the peopling of the Americas story, still spurring questions on roots. Before White Sands, before Buttermilk Creek, before ancient DNA studies upended everything, there was Monte Verde. Nestled in the cool, wet lowlands of southern Chile, Monte Verde is a humble archaeological site with an outsized reputation. First excavated in the late 1972nd and 82nd, it revealed evidence of human habitation dating back at least 14,500 years, 1,500 years before the supposed arrival of Clovis. And at the time, that was heresy. The prevailing academic dogma said humans couldn't have reached South America so early. The glaciers hadn't melted. The corridor through Canada wasn't open. The timelines didn't work. But Monte Verde didn't care. What archaeologists found there was extraordinary. Wooden planks from temporary structures, remnants of fireplaces, chewed seaweed, fragments of leather, and tools made from stone not native to the area. Even preserved mastodon meat. This wasn't just a camp, it was a community. But it wasn't just what they found, it was how they found it. The preservation was freakishly good, thanks to the boggy, waterlogged conditions. Organic material almost never seen at this age was intact. It was an ancient time capsule, sealed by mud, and it turned everything upside down. At first, the backlash was fierce. Many archaeologists refused to accept the pre-Clovis dating. It contradicted decades of textbooks. It required new migration theories. But over time, the evidence piled up. Monte Verde stood firm. The implications were vast. If people were in Chile 14,500 years ago, they had to have entered the Americas much earlier, maybe 16,000 or 17,000 years ago. And to get that far south, they likely didn't walk through Canada. They sailed. The Kelp Highway theory emerged. The idea that early migrants followed the Pacific coast by boat, exploiting marine life, sheltering in coves, and bypassing glacial blockades. Monte Verde became the anchor for this theory, a smoking gun from the southern hemisphere. But even now, questions remain. Was Monte Verde a one-off site? A seasonal stopover? Or part of a broader, older coastal migration that's still buried under rising seas and rainforest? And who were its people? What language did they speak? What beliefs did they carry in their packs as they moved south through an untamed continent? Monte Verde didn't just crack the Clovis timeline, it shattered the idea that we've got this figured out. It reminds us that history isn't a neat staircase, it's a field of footprints, half erased, waiting for us to notice. And now, as we track those invisible steps north again, we find ourselves in the great frozen silence of Beringia, a land that no longer exists, but may have held humanity in limbo for generations, a frozen cradle, a prehistoric bottleneck. a standstill before the flood. The Beringian standstill, how long populations paused, and how migration waves unfolded. To understand how humans reached the Americas, we must travel not just in space, but in time, to a place that no longer exists, Beringia. A vast land bridge that once connected Siberia to Alaska, exposed during the last ice age when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower. For thousands of years, it was neither fully Asia nor fully America. It was its own world, an ice age refuge for plants, animals, and people alike. And therein lies the riddle, not just how people crossed it, but how long they waited before continuing south. This is the Beringian standstill hypothesis. According to genetic evidence, the ancestors of Native Americans split from other Asian populations around 25,000 years ago. But archaeological evidence shows humans didn't appear in the Americas until at least 16,000 years ago, maybe later. So where were they in the meantime? The answer: stuck. Not in transit, but in pause. Trapped by glaciers to the east and west, the first migrants are believed to have lived in Beringia for thousands of years, long enough to develop their own distinct genetic signatures, languages, and possibly even cultural traits. Imagine a vast, treeless tundra steppe stretching from modern Siberia to the Alaskan interior, rich in megafauna mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, bison, sheltered from the harshest glacial climates. It wasn't a dead zone. It was a habitat, a place to live, not just pass through. Some researchers believe that people settled in Beringia for up to 10,000 years. Not a detour, a home. But it was an isolated one. Glacial walls to the south and west blocked easy exit. The ice-free corridor that would later open through Canada was, at that time, impassable. The Pacific coast was likely locked in ice and stormy seas. So the people waited, adapted, became something new. This prolonged isolation allowed for the development of a Beringian genetic signature, one that later spread with the first waves of migration into the Americas. Some genetic lineages found in modern Native American populations can be traced back to this standstill population. But if the standstill theory answers where people were, it raises new questions. How did they survive for millennia in a subarctic wilderness? What technologies did they develop? What spiritual beliefs were born under auroras and mammoth shadows? Sadly, physical evidence from this period is scarce. Beringia, after all, is gone submerged beneath the Bering and Chukchi seas as the ice melted and sea levels rose. The ancient camps, tools, and hearths of the standstill culture may lie drowned, unreachable beneath tons of salt water and silt. Yet hints remain. Archaeological sites in Siberia and Alaska, like Yana RHS and Bluefish Caves, suggest humans were living in the far north as early as 30,000 years ago. Bone tools, animal remains, and DNA samples hint at complex adaptation to Arctic life. But the true heart of Beringian culture, if it existed as such, remains out of reach. Still, the standstill is crucial. It reminds us that migration isn't always a forward march. Sometimes it's a pause, a breath, a season that becomes an epoch. The people of Beringia didn't just cross a bridge, they lived on it. And when the glaciers finally melted and the world warmed, they moved again, south into unpeopled lands, east into untouched forests, along coastlines now drowned. Their genes carried stories. Their myths traveled with them, and thus began the true peopling of the Americas. And while the Beringians waited in frozen limbo, another journey had already begun across even older waters, toward a continent where humanity's earliest footprints stretch back beyond imagination, toward a people who didn't just arrive, they stayed. First, Australians' arrivals, 65,000 years ago, are secure. Seafaring routes, means, and cultural transitions are still probed. Australia, a land of extremes, vast deserts, primal forests, Mars-red cliffs and coral reefs exploding with color. But long before European ships arrived, long before pyramids were built or mammoths hunted, this continent was home to one of humanity's most enduring and mysterious stories, the first Australians. They didn't walk there. They sailed. Let that sink in. The latest archaeological evidence places the arrival of Homo sapiens in Sahul, the ancient supercontinent comprising Australia, Tasmania, and New Guinea, at least 65,000 years ago. That's tens of thousands of years before any known writing system, before agriculture, before almost everything. These first migrants didn't just drift. They planned. They built watercraft capable of crossing stretches of open ocean. They navigated across island chains, maybe using stars, currents, and bird patterns, and they brought with them more than tools, they brought culture. But we still don't fully understand how they did it. One possibility is the northern route, island hopping through Indonesia to New Guinea, then down into Australia. Another theory suggests a southern route with a longer sea journey across the Timor Sea. Either way, it required cognition, coordination, and courage. And once they arrived, they stayed. Australia became home to a vibrant, deeply rooted human tradition that stretches back unbroken to the Ice Age. Rock art in Arnhem Land is among the oldest on Earth. Sites like Majid Bebe show sophisticated tool use, controlled fire, and long-term settlement structures dating back over 65,000 years. The landscape itself bears their signature. Firestick farming controlled burns to manage plant growth is one of the earliest known examples of large-scale environmental modification. Aboriginal Australians didn't just live in nature, they shaped it. And their culture? A cosmos in song. The dream time. An ancestral mythology that merges time, space, and creation into one endless narrative remains one of the most sophisticated oral traditions in human history. Passed down across millennia, the stories encode everything: geography, law, kinship, morality. These weren't just tales, they were maps. Yet for all this depth, questions remain. Did the first Australians wipe out the continent's megafauna? Giant kangaroos, marsupial lions, the massive diprotodon like a wombat crossed with a bison. Some scientists argue for human-driven extinction. Others blame climate change, or both. And what happened in the transitions between Ice Age and Holocene, between hunting and sedentism, between ancient and modern identities? One of the most fascinating aspects of Aboriginal culture is its adaptability. Despite climatic upheaval, sea level rise, colonial invasion, and forced displacement, the cultural memory has persisted. The oldest continuous culture on Earth isn't a ruin, it's alive. But we still don't fully understand how it began. No boats have been found, no definitive migration camps. The earliest chapters remain submerged, like so many coastal settlements lost to rising seas. What we do know is this: the story of human migration didn't start in Europe, or Egypt, or Mesopotamia. It began here. With a journey across open ocean, in a time before history, by a people who would become the continent's first and eternal custodians. And while their story stretches back into the Paleolithic twilight, another extinction shadowed their arrival. A great dying, not just of beasts, but of ecological order. A vanishing act still debated. Was it climate? Was it us? Or was it both? Pleistocene megafauna extinctions, human overkill versus climate, vegetation change, or both, varies by continent. Imagine a world filled with giants. In North America, herds of mammoths and mastodons thundered across icy plains. Giant ground sloths as big as small cars lumbered through forests. Saber-toothed cats stalked bison. Glyptodons, armored mammals the size of Volkswagens, trundled beside prehistoric armadillos. In Australia, there were marsupial lions, giant kangaroos, 2 0-foot-long snakes, and birds taller than NBA players. South America had elephant-sized sloths, Eurasia had woolly rhinos. Africa had. Well, it still has some of its megafauna, but far fewer than it once did. Then, seemingly overnight on the geological clock, they vanished. Between roughly 50,000 and 10,000 years ago, the Pleistocene megafauna disappeared across nearly every continent except Africa. And the burning question is why? Theory 1. Climate change. As the last ice age ended, global temperatures rose, habitats shifted, vegetation patterns changed, food sources dwindled. The world was warming fast, and some giants couldn't adapt. Theory 2. Human overkill. As Homo sapiens spread across the globe, the timing of extinction events eerily aligns with our arrival. In Australia, megafauna vanish around the time humans arrive, 65,000 years ago. In the Americas, the big die-off happens just after the Clovis culture appears. Coincidence? Maybe not. The Blitzkrieg hypothesis argues that small bands of efficient hunters, equipped with fire and coordination, could quickly devastate fragile animal populations, especially species with long gestation periods and low birth rates. Others argue for a synergy. Humans arrived at the worst possible moment when ecosystems were already under stress. A few thousand years earlier, and perhaps the mammoths would have weathered the shift. A few thousand later, and maybe humans would have arrived too late. In Australia, fire is a key suspect. Early humans may have altered landscapes with firestick farming, changing grasslands into scrub and reducing viable habitat for large herbivores. In North America, kill sites where humans hunted mammoths or bison in organized drives suggest deliberate strategy. Spears and ribs, bones butchered with flint tools. These weren't accidents. But the data isn't uniform. Africa and Southeast Asia retained many of their megafauna, despite similar climate changes and long human presence. Why? Possibly because those animals co-evolved with humans. They learned to fear us. They adapted to the predator that was unlike any before. But in continents where humans were newcomers, the giants had no defense. Today, the extinction of the Pleistocene megafauna haunts us like a ghost. It wasn't just about animals, it was about ecosystems. Keystone species vanished, food chains collapsed. The world grew smaller, quieter, less wild. And yet the debate rages on. Was it us? Was it weather? Was it the quiet catastrophe of both? One thing's certain. As soon as we arrive, things change. Not slowly, not subtly, but with impact. And now, from the footprints of extinction, we move into the genetic fog of a lost lineage, not quite Neanderthal, not quite modern human. A ghost population known only from fragments, and yet their legacy lives inside us still. Denisovan's scant fossils, vast genetic legacy, geographic range, appearance, and cultural repertoire remain largely unknown. Buried in the cold bones of Siberia's Altai Mountains, inside a cave called Denisova, lies one of the strangest stories in all of human evolution. A story without faces, without names, without tools, cities, or myths. A story told not in stone, but in genes. In 2008, researchers discovered a finger bone in Denisova Cave. It was tiny, broken, and unremarkable. At first glance, it could have belonged to anyone. But when scientists sequenced its DNA, the results didn't match Neanderthals or modern humans. It was something else. A third kind of human, one previously unknown to science, the Denisovans. Since then, we've learned remarkably little and shockingly much. From that single phalanx, a few teeth, and one jawbone found thousands of miles away in Tibet, we've built a profile of a human lineage that spread across Asia, interbred with us, and left behind a legacy encoded in our very cells. And yet we still don't know what they looked like. Not a single complete skeleton has been found. Not even a skull. We can't draw their faces. We can't say how tall they were, what color their skin was, or how they spoke. All we know comes from ancient DNA and archaeological whispers. But those whispers are loud. Denisovan DNA shows up in modern humans, especially in Melanesians, Aboriginal Australians, and some East and Southeast Asian populations. In some people, up to 5% of their DNA is Denisovan. That's not a fluke. That's contact, intimacy, blended lives. We know Denisovans interbred with both modern humans and Neanderthals. One individual found in Denisova Cave was the direct daughter of a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. That's not abstract. That's a family. So where did they live? The range is still being mapped. The original cave is in southern Siberia. The jawbone was found on the Tibetan Plateau at over 10,000 feet elevation. That suggests Denisovans were cold-adapted, capable of high-altitude living. Genetic adaptations found in modern Tibetans, such as the EPAS, one gene that helps with oxygen regulation, are believed to come from Denisovans. This means their range was vast, possibly from the steppes of Russia to the islands of Southeast Asia. They may have crossed into regions as far south as Indonesia, maybe even as far as Australia. But what did they do? Did they make art? Bury their dead? Use symbols? Here, the record is frustratingly thin. There's evidence that they used tools perhaps more advanced than the typical Middle Paleolithic standard. In Denisova Cave, bracelets and bone needles were found in the same layers as Denisovan remains, but whether they made them, traded for them, or simply inherited them remains uncertain. And therein lies the real mystery. Denisovans have left behind a ghost empire, not cities, not monuments, but DNA. They shaped the immune systems, bodies, and even adaptations of modern humans across Asia and Oceania. But we cannot see their eyes. We cannot hear their voices. They are the invisible architects of a genetic legacy without a face. And perhaps that's the strangest fate of all, to live on not as fossils, but as percentages. As Denisovans fade into the genetic background, another ancient cousin looms large in both bones and mythology. They once dominated Europe, then disappeared. But the reasons why remain tangled in theory and conjecture. Their echoes are stronger, but their end no less mysterious. Why Neanderthals disappeared? Climate shocks, competition, pathogens, demography, or synergy? No single consensus. The Neanderthals? Stocky, strong, ice-adapted, and human, very human. For most of the past 200,000 years, they ruled Europe and parts of Western Asia. They hunted mammoths, they built shelters, they buried their dead, they made tools, wore clothing, maybe even spoke. And then, they vanished. By around 40,000 years ago, the last Neanderthal had drawn their final breath. Their bones lay cold in caves, their tools stopped being made, their fire pits burned out, and into the vacuum stepped us Homo sapiens. But why did they disappear? Theory 1. Climate instability. The Ice Age wasn't a steady freeze, it was a roller coaster of warming and cooling. Massive environmental swings could have disrupted Neanderthal food sources. Forests turned to tundra turned to forest. Adaptation was hard, especially for small, scattered groups. Theory 2. Competition. When Homo sapiens arrived in Europe fresh from Africa, adapted for endurance, mobility, and collaboration, they may have outcompeted Neanderthals. Not in pitched battle, but in resource efficiency. Our ancestors may have formed larger social groups, used more diverse tools, and traded over longer distances. They could have had better cognitive flexibility, or simply more babies. Theory 3. Pathogens. When species interact, so do their microbes. It's possible that Homo sapiens carried diseases that Neanderthals had no immunity against. A prehistoric version of the Columbian Exchange. The flu, but terminal. Theory 4. Demography. Neanderthals lived in small, scattered populations. Genetic evidence shows they were already inbred and bottlenecked long before contact. Small communities are vulnerable not just to extinction, but to randomness. A few bad winters, a failed generation, a fire. Theory 5. Synergy. Maybe it wasn't one cause. Maybe it was all of them. Climate stressed them. Homo sapiens arrived. Disease swept through. Fertility dropped. And slowly, silently, they slipped away. But they didn't entirely vanish. Like Denisovans, Neanderthals live on in us. Most people of non-African descent carry about 1–2% Neanderthal DNA. Traits like immune system responses, skin adaptation, and even risk factors for diseases may trace back to our vanished cousins. Some modern humans even share Neanderthal genes linked to depression, nicotine addiction, and sleep patterns. The ghosts of their biology are still in our brains. And perhaps most hauntingly, we know they were close to us. Interbreeding happened. Culture was shared. They weren't dumb brutes, they were family. Maybe the most painful truth is this. We didn't kill Neanderthals. We absorbed them. They vanished not in war, but in love, in blending, in time. But while Neanderthals left bones and tools and genomes, our next mystery is even stranger. A tiny hominin, isolated on an island, standing barely a meter tall, a real-life hobbit, discovered in the heart of Indonesia, who challenges everything we thought we knew about evolution and isolation. Homo floresiensis, hobbits, dwarf Homo on Flores, insular dwarfing, ancestry, and fate remain debated. In 2003, inside the limestone cave of Liang Bua on the Indonesian island of Flores, scientists uncovered what looked like a hoax, a tiny human skull, absurdly small, with a brain the size of a grapefruit. But it wasn't fake. It was real, and it belonged to a species we'd never seen before. Homo floresiensis. Nicknamed the Hobbit, this diminutive hominin stood about 3.5 feet tall, weighed around 25 kilograms, and had feet proportionally too big for its body. It walked upright. It made stone tools. It hunted dwarf elephants. And it lived as recently as 50,000 years ago. Let that sink in. As modern humans were painting in caves and spreading across continents, a population of tiny humans lived in island forests unaware of us, possibly untouched, possibly isolated for hundreds of thousands of years. So where did they come from? Theory 1. Insular dwarfism. Homo floresiensis may have descended from Homo erectus early humans who colonized the island and gradually shrank in size due to limited resources and ecological constraints. On islands, evolution bends the rules. Big things get small things get big. Flores was a biological pressure cooker. Theory 2. They came from an even earlier lineage. Some researchers argue that their anatomy, especially the shape of their wrists and feet, suggests a more primitive ancestor, maybe Homo habilis or even Australopithecus. If true, it would mean hominins left Africa much earlier and in more diverse waves than we thought. But the big question is, how did they survive so long? Flores is not an easy place, volcanic, seismically active, but it also provided isolation, protection, no large predators, limited competition. Homo floresiensis may have found an ecological niche and clung to it, generation after generation, for millennia. Then they disappeared. Exactly when and why is unclear. Some believe they went extinct when modern humans arrived. Others point to volcanic eruptions or ecological change. Whatever the cause, by the time we find them, they're already gone. No art, no writing, no burials, just bones, tools, and questions. The discovery shook paleoanthropology to its core. If evolution could produce this, what else might we be missing? Are there other islands with other species, still buried beneath soil and secrecy? And perhaps the greatest irony, while hobbits now belong to legend and fiction, they were once real, in fact. Small, intelligent, tool-using people who lived alongside giants and mystery, and who may still be hiding, in fossil form, under layers of forgotten earth. And as we leave the forests of Flores behind, we return to stone, massive, enigmatic, and distributed like seeds of belief across the Atlantic coasts, to a tradition so wide and old it seems impossible. Megaliths, monuments, the rise of stone before the rise of cities. Homo naledi, behaviors, burial, and symbolism. Claims are hotly contested for this small-brained hominin. In the dark, claustrophobic belly of South Africa's rising star cave system, more than 1,500 fossil fragments were hauled out between 2013 and 2014, human-like, but not quite human. The skulls were small, the hips wide, the hands delicate, the brain cases alarmingly tiny, just 465 to 610 cubic centimeters, barely a third the size of a modern human's podocyst. And yet, here was a person. Sort of. This was Homo naledi, a new species of ancient hominin, walking upright but carrying a brain not much bigger than a chimpanzee's. They lived around 250,000 to 300,000 years ago, shockingly recent. That means they were alive at the same time as early Homo sapiens, and maybe even met us. But the fossils weren't just scattered. They were clustered in deep, nearly inaccessible chambers of the cave, far from daylight, through a narrow chute so tight that only petite, trained spelunkers could reach it. No other animal bones, no evidence of flooding or predator transport, just Homo naledi, over and over again, in the dark. That's when the firestorm started. Lead researcher Lee Berger proposed a radical idea that these small-brained hominins were intentionally disposing of their dead, burying them, or at least placing them deliberately, which, if true, would explode the long-standing assumption that symbolic behavior and mortuary rituals required large brains. Here's the rub. Homo naledi's brain was tiny, smaller than a gorilla's. Could such a mind comprehend death? Could it feel grief? Could it engage in ritual? Some say yes, that burial is not about intellect, but emotion, that even elephants and crows mourn, that Homo naledi may have had a sense of body and not body, a need to return the dead to the earth. It doesn't require poetry, just awareness. Others cry foul. They argue that the bones may have been moved by natural processes, or that the individuals crawled in and died. No need to invoke complex behaviors, no need for tombs or symbols. Just chance and geology. Then, it got weirder. In 2023, new papers claimed to have found engravings, scratch marks on cave walls near some of the remains. Berger's team floated the idea of symbolic art, that Homo naledi might have not only buried their dead, but marked the place. Not words, not drawings, just deliberate, abstract lines. If that's true, it's seismic. It would mean symbolism, one of the crown jewels of Homo sapiens, might have bloomed in other species, in smaller brains, in other minds. Critics remain skeptical. The engravings could be incidental, the deposits accidental, and the dates still contested. But even if the claims are overstated, the bones are real. Homo naledi walked with us or close to us. They lived, moved, perhaps mourned, and vanished. We may never know how they saw the world, whether they feared the dark or saw beauty in the dead. But in a cramped chamber, deep in South African stone, they left their bodies in a place no predator would reach. That fact alone feels like a message, however simple, however silent. And now, as we emerge from the caves of thought and shadow, we shift from the deep interior to the sweeping coasts of Europe, where another mystery takes shape in colossal stones. A mystery not of death, but of collaboration, of engineering, of ideology. Who built the first great megaliths, and how did the idea spread across continents before the Bronze Age even began? Origins of European megalithism now modeled to start in NW France, but mechanisms of rapid spread are still parsed. Let's talk stone. Big, ugly, beautiful slabs stood upright by people with no metal, no wheels, and no written language. From the windswept fields of Brittany to the moors of England, the coasts of Iberia to the hills of Denmark, megaliths litter the landscape, like forgotten gods, dolmens, menhirs, passage graves, and stone circles. And for years, archaeologists believed these massive monuments emerged independently across different regions, a local response to local needs. No need for grand theories, just coincidence and stone. But then came the radiocarbon data, the Bayesian models, the refined typologies, and suddenly, the picture changed. Evidence now points to a single origin point, northwest France, around 4700 BCE. From there, the tradition of megalith building seems to have exploded across coastal Europe first, into the Iberian Peninsula, then Ireland, Britain, Scandinavia, and even as far east as the Czech lands. All within a few centuries. That's not a slow cultural drift. That's a boom. So, how did it happen? Theory 1. Seafaring diffusion. The builders of Brittany and Normandy were among the earliest maritime cultures of Europe. They had boats, coastal knowledge, and long-range trade links. Megalithism may have spread via these nautical networks, carried by people who saw stone not just as structure but as symbol. But what were they symbolizing? Theory 2. Ancestor cults. Many of the earliest megaliths are tombs, long barrows, passage graves, chambered cairns. They weren't just burial sites, they were monuments to the dead, rising out of the earth like memories made solid. A megalith wasn't just a grave, it was a claim. Theory 3. Social competition. In a world without kings or cities, who had power? Maybe the groups who could mobilize enough labor to move 10-ton stones. Megaliths became status symbols, not for individuals, but for communities. A way to say, we were here, we endure. And there's the strange consistency. Across regions, megaliths share architectural features, trilithons, capstones, cairn facades, not identical, but familiar, like dialects of a common language. Did a shared religion fuel the spread? A pan-European belief system focused on death, earth, and the sky? Or did the megalith builders simply borrow ideas like we borrow memes, remixing, adapting, blending old forms into new contexts? Whatever the cause, the speed of spread is shocking. Within 300 years, the megalithic tradition was present in nearly every corner of Atlantic Europe. For a pre-literate, low-tech world, that's a viral phenomenon. And yet it fades. By around 2500 BCE, megalith building slows. New burial forms emerge. Stone circles take precedence. The old passage graves become places of reverence, not replication. But the stones remain, defiant, obsolete, beautiful. They outlived the people who built them. They outlived the languages and gods that gave them meaning. And today, they still mark the land like scars from a dream we forgot how to interpret. And as we trace the megalithic wave, one question remains unanswered. What fueled the spread, and what connected these builders? To understand the power of materials in the ancient world, we now turn to a substance stranger than stone, essential to an entire age, yet whose origins are still partly hidden. A metal without which the Bronze Age could not exist, but which, even now, refuses to tell us where it came from. The tin problem. The Bronze Age's tin supply chains are only partly traced. Sources remain mysterious in many regions. Copper's easy. It melts, it's pretty, it's abundant, but copper alone is weak. You want something that cuts, something that lasts? You alloy it, you add tin, and now you've got bronze. Welcome to the Bronze Age. But here's the kicker. While copper sources are relatively well known and widespread across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, tin is another story entirely. Tin is rare. It doesn't just show up everywhere, and yet Bronze Age cultures from Mesopotamia to Britain were making bronze tools, weapons, and art for over 1,000 years. So the question becomes, where the hell did all the tin come from? This is the tin problem, an archaeological cold case that's confounded researchers for decades. Sure, we know some tin came from known sources, Cornwall in Britain, the Erzgebirge, Ore Mountains in Germany, possibly from Central Asia, Uzbekistan or Afghanistan, later from Iberia. But when you do the math, when you calculate the sheer tonnage of bronze being produced across the ancient world, the sources don't add up. There's a supply and demand mismatch. There had to be other tin mines, other trade routes, whole economies built on invisible ore. Some theories suggest long-distance trade tin traveling overland from Central Asia through Persia into Mesopotamia or by sea from Iberia to the Levant. That implies a staggering level of coordination and communication. It means Bronze Age traders were not just local peddlers, they were logistics experts. And tin was valuable, more than gold, in some regions. It wasn't just a resource, it was a currency of technological power. The society that controlled tin controlled warfare, but the lack of physical evidence is maddening. Many tin mines have likely eroded, collapsed, or been obliterated by later mining. Others may still lie buried, undiscovered. Some may have been worked only briefly, then abandoned. Still others may have left no trace at all, just the bronze that survived. Then there's the question of how these traders knew where to find it. Did they follow riverbeds? Track native veins? Were there ancient prospectors? Or was it dumb luck, institutionalized over generations? Some researchers now use isotope analysis to trace the tin in bronze artifacts back to potential sources. Early results are promising, but still incomplete. The mystery lingers. The tin problem isn't just about metal. It's about networks, knowledge, and the ghost infrastructure of the past. It's about what happens when a civilization depends on a resource it doesn't fully control, and how that might drive exploration, war, and collapse. Because when the tin runs out, so does the bronze. And as the age of metal dawned, another ancient alliance was quietly forming, one that would reshape evolution itself. A pact not between humans and elements, but between humans and animals. An alliance forged in firelight, sealed with scraps and loyalty, still alive today. A tale of how one species chose us, or maybe how we chose each other. Dog domestication, where, when it began, single versus multiple centers, and how it entwined with humans are unresolved. Before wheels, before writing, before the rise of city-states and kings, there were dogs, not just animals living near humans, not livestock, not prey, but partners. The first domesticated species, the oldest friendship we know. And yet, despite their curled-up presence at the hearth of human history, we still don't know where dogs came from, or when they became dogs, or whether it happened once or many times. The mystery of dog domestication is like a puzzle missing its edges. We have pieces, bones, genes, myths, but not the full picture. Let's start with the basics. Dogs descend from wolves. Specifically, a now extinct population of gray wolves. But when did the split occur? Genetic studies suggest somewhere between 15,000 and 40,000 years ago. That's a margin of error wider than the entire Bronze Age. Where did it happen? That's even murkier. Some researchers point to Central Asia. Others say Eastern Europe, Siberia, China, the Middle East, maybe multiple places at once. Maybe the idea of domestication isn't a point, but a process happening across time and geography. One theory suggests early wolves began trailing human hunter-gatherers, feeding on scraps at the edges of campfires. The bolder ones got closer. The humans tolerated them. Eventually, the tamest wolves became part of the tribe. Not bred, at first, but chosen by behavior. Another theory posits deliberate adoption, that humans took in wolf pups, raised them, and selectively bred those that were more docile, more cooperative, more useful. Either way, something magical happened. We didn't just tame wolves. We shaped them. Within a few generations, the wild look softened, the ears drooped, the tails curled, the eyes widened, behavior changed. Two dogs became more attuned to human social cues than even chimpanzees. They could read our emotions, follow our gaze, understand our gestures. They became helpers, hunters, guards, companions, and in return, we fed them, sheltered them, brought them into the fold. By the time agriculture emerged, dogs were already there. By the time humans built cities, dogs had already traveled with them across deserts, tundras, and forests. They crossed the Bering Land Bridge with the first Americans. They appear in Neolithic graves, curled beside children. They were painted in cave art, buried with warriors, praised by poets. But the archaeological trail is tangled. Some of the earliest confirmed dog remains come from Germany, dated to 14,000 years ago. But there are disputed finds in Belgium, Siberia, and even Israel that push the date back further, perhaps 30,000 years. Some of these may be wolves, some may be dogs. The line is blurred. DNA analysis reveals even more confusion. Different ancient dog populations show genetic affinities with different wolf lineages, many of which no longer exist. Some ancient dogs share little ancestry with modern breeds, suggesting whole lineages have been lost. Bottlenecks, migrations, interbreeding, it's a genomic soup. Then there's the debate over single versus multiple domestication events. Did dogs evolve from wolves once, in one place, and then spread with humans across the globe? Or did different groups of people domesticate local wolves independently, leading to multiple proto-dogs that eventually merged? No one knows for sure. And yet, the dog's influence is undeniable. They changed the way humans hunted, aided in guarding camps, tracking game, herding livestock. In some cultures, they were sacred. In others, sacrifices. In nearly all, companions. Unlike livestock bred purely for utility, dogs occupied a different emotional space. They were with us, not of us. They didn't just serve, they belonged. Today, the domestic dog is one of the most genetically diverse species on Earth, from 3-pound Chihuahuas to 150-pound Great Danes. That diversity is a testament to the flexibility of their partnership with humans, molded over millennia to fit our every need. And yet their origin remains veiled. They've been beside us from the beginning, and they may outlast us in the end. And now, from loyal companions on dry land, we dive beneath ancient waves to a world long drowned, a vanished land, once teeming with life and mystery, now hidden beneath the chill of the North Sea. Doggerland, who lived on the drowned North Sea plain, and how they adapted as seas rose. Imagine a land connecting Britain to mainland Europe, a vast expanse of grasslands, rivers, lakes, and forests. A place where mammoths roamed, hunter-gatherers fished and foraged, and people moved freely from what is now Norfolk to the Netherlands. That place existed. It was real. It was called Doggerland. And now, it's gone drowned beneath the North Sea. During the last ice age, sea levels were far lower than today. Much of what we now call the North Sea was dry land, a bridge between worlds. It was not a narrow strip, but a continent in miniature, up to 100,000 square miles of habitable terrain. People lived there, not mythically, not metaphorically, literally. We know this because of trawlers. Fishermen working in the southern North Sea regularly drag up artifacts from the seabed, Mesolithic tools, animal bones, even human remains, bison teeth, antler picks, flint axes, all pulled from the deep like ghost memories. Geological surveys have mapped ancient river systems beneath the seabed, entire landscapes frozen in sediment. One river, larger than the Thames, once carved its way through Doggerland. There were hills, valleys, coastlines. It was a real place. So who lived there? Likely Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, people with no writing, no agriculture, but deep knowledge of land and sea. They hunted red deer and aurochs. They fished in freshwater rivers. They made boats, likely dugouts, and paddled between islands and estuaries. Doggerland would have been a prime location rich in resources, buffered from the extremes of the Ice Age, a hub between regions. But the sea was coming. As the glaciers melted, sea levels began to rise slowly at first, then with accelerating force. Doggerland shrank. Rivers became estuaries. Hills became islands. The land retreated. People adapted temporarily. Then came the Storegga Slide. Around 8,200 years ago, a massive underwater landslide off the coast of Norway triggered a tsunami. Waves surged over what remained of Doggerland, obliterating coastlines and possibly delivering the final blow. In the wake of that disaster, the remaining dry land was quickly consumed by rising seas. And then, silence. Doggerland disappeared. Not into myth, but into absence. It wasn't remembered. It wasn't named. It was lost for millennia, its memory drowned and erased. Only in recent decades, thanks to marine archaeology, sonar mapping, and accidental discoveries, has Doggerland re-emerged into scholarly focus. But it remains tantalizingly out of reach. We have no settlements, no cemeteries, just tools, bones, and traces of vanished rivers. And yet the implications are staggering. Doggerland reminds us that history isn't fixed. It shifts beneath our feet, that whole human worlds can vanish. That memory is not always carried by story, but by sediment and silence. It also challenges our notions of migration and identity. The people who once roamed Doggerland didn't see Britain as an island. They didn't cross into Europe. They lived in a continuum of land that no longer exists. Their story ended not with conquest, but with water. And now, from a lost land swallowed by the sea, we shift to a myth of flood on a more cataclysmic scale. A story echoed in ancient legends, scientific models, and archaeological debate. Was there a great deluge in the Black Sea basin? And if so, how did it shape the rise of early civilizations? Black Sea, deluge hypothesis magnitude, timing of Holocene, transgression and cultural impacts remain disputed. In the mythic imagination of humanity, there is always a flood. From Gilgamesh to Genesis, from the Epic of Atrahasis to Ovid's Tales of Deucalion, the idea of a world-drowning deluge is carved deep into our collective psyche. But what if some of those stories were echoes, not just of myth, but of memory? Enter the Black Sea, deluge hypothesis. In the late 1992, oceanographers William Ryan and Walter Pittman proposed a controversial theory that around 7,600 years ago, the Black Sea underwent a sudden and catastrophic transformation. Once a freshwater lake, it was flooded by rising Mediterranean waters through the Bosporus Strait, becoming the salty inland sea we know today. This was not a gentle rise. According to their model, water levels rose rapidly, perhaps several meters per day. Coastal plains, villages, and rivers were overwhelmed. An entire prehistoric ecosystem drowned. If true, it would have been a civilizational apocalypse. Imagine living near the shoreline, fishing in brackish waters, raising livestock, planting early crops. Then overnight, the sea surges inland, devouring everything. Crops, homes, graveyards. Gone. A mass displacement. A lost world. And perhaps the seed of a legend. Supporters of the theory suggest this event inspired the flood myths of Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean, that it was passed down orally, morphing into stories of divine wrath and wooden arks. But the theory is still hotly debated. Some researchers argue that the flooding was slower, more gradual, that it took years, not days. Others say the region was already partially saline before the supposed event. New sediment cores and dating methods continue to shift the timeline. And there's the question of impact. Did it really cause mass migration? Did people flee into Anatolia, the Balkans, and beyond, carrying with them early agricultural techniques, belief systems, and the trauma of a submerged homeland? There's tantalizing archaeological evidence, sudden cultural shifts, abandoned settlements, new pottery styles appearing inland, but none of it is conclusive. Yet the idea persists because it feels true. Because we know the sea rises, because we know worlds drown. Doggerland is proof, and perhaps the Black Sea too. Whether it was a trickle or a torrent, the Holocene transgression reshaped the landscape. It redrew coastlines, it tested adaptation, it whispered myths that would outlive the facts. And as the waters filled the basin and the salt replaced the fresh, a new chapter began. One where rivers vanished, deserts bloomed, and humans were forced to follow the green ghosts of rivers that once ran through the Sahara. Sahara's lost rivers, how the Tamanrasset Paleo River and Green Sahara supported people and movements. Today, the Sahara is a land of extremes, endless dunes, blistering heat, a brutal desert stretching across nearly a third of Africa. But it wasn't always like this. Beneath the waves of sand lie the ghosts of rivers, not just dry channels or wadis, but real rivers, wide, deep, flowing, sustaining ecosystems that no longer exist. This is the story of the Green Sahara, and of the rivers like the mythical Tamanrasset that once carved it into a fertile corridor of life and movement. During the African humid period, roughly 14,000 to 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was not a desert but a savanna. Monsoons shifted northward, rain fell, lakes formed, grasslands flourished, and rivers, massive, life-giving rivers, crisscrossed what we now see as lifeless sand. The Tamanrasset is the most legendary of them, an ancient mega-river that may have flowed from the Hoggar Mountains in Algeria all the way to the Atlantic coast of Mauritania, possibly rivaling the Nile in volume during peak flow, not metaphorically, literally. A transcontinental artery hidden under dunes. Satellite data reveals wide channels buried beneath the sand. Remote sensing shows sediment paths consistent with sustained water flow. But the river itself has vanished, its bones scattered in mud layers, fossilized pollen, and the DNA of freshwater organisms trapped in unlikely places. And where there are rivers, there are people. Rock art scattered across the Sahara, thousands of carvings and paintings shows hippos, crocodiles, elephants, giraffes, creatures that only live where there's water, and among them, humans, herding, hunting, living. This wasn't an occasional oasis. It was a civilization scaffold. Nomads, pastoralists, possibly even early sedentary communities, used the Green Sahara as a corridor. They moved between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean. Ideas moved with them, styles of pottery, domesticated cattle, even belief systems. Some researchers argue that the Sahara was once a bridge, not a barrier. But then, the rain stopped. Around 5,000 years ago, the African monsoon system shifted south, slowly at first, then drastically. The lakes dried, the rivers died, the green turned to gold. Desertification accelerated, and people began to move away from the heart of the Sahara, toward the Nile, toward the Sahel, toward the coasts. The Tamanrasset faded, not just physically, but mythically. Oral traditions may recall rivers long gone, but the landscape no longer matches the memory. The Sahara became the impassable expanse we know today. Yet, traces remain. Some desert settlements show evidence of permanent habitation thousands of years ago before they were swallowed by sand. Subsurface radar has revealed old lake beds beneath dunes. Animal bones and pollen profiles confirm wetter, greener conditions. And now, the questions multiply. Was the Tamanrasset River seasonal or year-round? Did it support migration into West Africa and beyond? Could it explain some of the early population dispersals that shaped African prehistory? And perhaps most provocatively, if the Sahara could bloom once, could it do so again? The rhythms of Earth's orbit, the so-called Milankovitch cycles, suggest that humid periods return every 20,000 years, which means, eventually, the Sahara might become green again. But for now, its rivers remain buried, both literally and figuratively. A hidden legacy of water, life, and movement beneath the world's most notorious desert. And as we leave the drowned riverbeds and fossilized lakes behind, we travel thousands of miles across ocean and myth to a windswept island where strange symbols cling to ancient wood. A writing system, or is it, that no one alive can read? A script that may never be decoded and may never have meant what we think it did. Rapa Nui's script, Rongorongo, authentic pre-contact writing or post-contact mnemonic marks, still undeciphered. Easter Island, Rapa Nui, known mostly for its moai, the towering stone heads gazing silently over barren grasslands. But hidden in the shadow of these icons lies another enigma, one not carved in volcanic rock, but etched into wood, a mystery of language, memory, and maybe deception. This is the story of Rongorongo, one of the world's strangest, least understood scripts. First recorded by Europeans in the 19th century, Rongorongo consists of intricate glyphs inscribed in boustrophedon style, where each line is written in alternating directions, like an ox plowing a field. The glyphs depict stylized humans, animals, plants, and abstract shapes, dozens of repeating forms. Not random, not ornamental, but also not understood. And here's the kicker. We don't even know if it's writing. That's the core of the debate. Rongorongo may be a true script recording language, preserving knowledge, a Polynesian counterpart to Egyptian hieroglyphs or Sumerian cuneiform. Or it could be a mnemonic system, a collection of memory aids, prompts for oral chants, genealogies, rituals. Or it could be a 19th century invention, created after European contact in response to pressure, colonization, or desperation. Let's break it down. Only 26 known Rongorongo artifacts survive. All were collected after European contact. Some were found in missionary collections. Others were held by locals who could not read them. A few were burned or lost. The remaining tablets are scattered across museums from Santiago to Honolulu to the Vatican. The carving style is consistent. The symbols recur. Patterns suggest syntax, structure, perhaps grammar, but no one alive knows what they say. Attempts to decode Rongorongo have stalled for decades. There's no Rosetta Stone, no bilingual inscription, no surviving oral tradition that preserves its content. Some researchers believe it encodes calendrical information, astronomy, lunar cycles. Others say it lists kings or clan lineages. One theory even suggests it recorded genealogies for ritual recitation. But then there's the skepticism. The earliest mention of Rongorongo comes in the 1862. By then, Rapa Nui society had been devastated by Peruvian slave raids, epidemics, and missionary zeal. Culture was collapsing. Oral memory was fragmented. Could Rongorongo have been invented in this desperate moment? An attempt to mimic European books? A symbol of resistance or adaptation? There's precedent. Cargo cults, invented traditions, visual systems created in the wake of trauma. And yet, it feels older. The style of the glyphs, the wear on the wood, the complexity, the repetition, it all suggests a system developed over time, not spontaneously fabricated. If Rongorongo is truly pre-contact, it would be the only indigenous script ever developed in Oceania. A staggering achievement, a Polynesian exception to the global script narrative. It would mean that Rapa Nui, isolated and sparsely populated, independently invented writing. But we can't prove it. We can't even translate it. Computer-assisted pattern recognition has helped identify recurring glyph sequences. Statistical models suggest structure, but without context, without a key, it's linguistic noise. A song with no melody, a letter with no language. And so Rongorongo remains an enigma. It may contain myths, prayers, laws, nothing at all, or everything. We may never know, but it stands as a symbol not just of Rapa Nui's mystery, but of the fragility of knowledge, of how easily a script can die, how quickly meaning can be lost, how close we always are to forgetting. And as we leave the etched wood of a lost language behind, we step deeper into the jungles of South America, where the forest hides not just trees, but geometry, circles, lines, massive earthworks that defy the chaos of the wild. Who carved order into the Amazon? And what kind of civilization left these signs beneath the canopy? Amazon ring ditches and geoglyph networks, how widespread were engineered forests, and what social systems made them? The Amazon, a place of overwhelming abundance, a tangle of vines, rivers, predators, and clouds. It seems eternal, untouched, primal, chaotic. But that illusion is wrong. Beneath the green waves of the rainforest lie scars, patterns, grids, earthworks that stretch for miles, circles, squares, ditches, raised roads. They don't belong to nature. They belong to design. This is the secret geometry of the Amazon. Discovered mostly through deforestation and aerial surveys, hundreds of geoglyphs, some dating back over 2,000 years, dot the southern Amazon basin, especially in Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru. They are vast. Some are nearly a kilometer across, dug with stone tools, shaped by hand, maintained over generations. And no one knows exactly why they exist. Some are simple enclosures, concentric rings, parallel lines, square embankments. Others connect in complex networks, aligned with celestial events. The soil inside is different terra preta, a man-made nutrient-rich earth that suggests long-term habitation and agricultural planning. This isn't wilderness, it's engineered. Far from being untouched, the pre-Columbian Amazon was likely a mosaic of managed landscapes, forest gardens, orchards, raised fields, fish farms, fire breaks. The people here didn't conquer nature, they collaborated with it. And they did it at scale. Some estimates suggest that millions of people may have lived in the Amazon before European contact. Not scattered tribes, but interconnected societies, perhaps even cities, linked by causeways and canals. The ring ditches may have served multiple purposes: defensive structures, ceremonial centers, residences, calendrical observatories. Their form is consistent, but their function remains debated. And then came the collapse. Disease, conquest, and colonization erased these civilizations before they were ever documented. By the time European explorers arrived, the forest had begun to reclaim the earthworks. Oral traditions faded. Paths disappeared. The jungle closed in. But now, LiDAR light detection and ranging is peeling back the canopy, revealing hundreds more geoglyphs, even in regions previously thought uninhabited. The implications are huge. It means the Amazon isn't just a natural marvel. It's a cultural one. A rainforest shaped by human hands, long before colonial eyes saw it. A biome with memory. And yet, the builders remain nameless. No writing, no monuments, just patterns in soil, ghosts in geometry. But those ghosts are speaking again. They tell of a society that mastered the forest not with chainsaws, but with patience. Not by clearing it, but by understanding it. They knew the cycles of flood and fire, the habits of trees, the flow of water and time. They built with earth, not stone, with seeds, not swords. And then they vanished. As we follow the last traces of their earthworks into the savannas of Kenya, we arrive at another forgotten monument, this time of stone, tall pillars, unmarked graves. A megalithic mystery rising from the heart of East Africa. Turkana pillar sites, Kenya megalithic cemeteries by early herders. Alignments, social meaning, and regional networks are still being mapped. In the arid northwest of Kenya, along the ancient shores of what was once a much larger Lake Turkana, rise strange silhouettes of stone. Rows of basalt pillars, planted in circles and lines, erupt from the dust like a fossilized council of elders. They stand alone, far from the monumental traditions of Egypt or Mesopotamia, but they speak a language just as ancient, the language of the dead, the sky, and the land. These are the Turkana pillar sites, some of Africa's oldest megalithic structures. Built over 5,000 years ago by early pastoralist societies, they are unlike anything else on the continent at the time. Not cities, not temples, but monuments nonetheless, marked by intentional design, communal labor, and enduring mystery. Who built them? Not farmers, not kings, but mobile herders. These were people who moved with their flocks, tracking rainfall, grass, and survival. Yet, despite their mobility, they invested tremendous effort into creating permanent stone architecture, piling boulders, raising standing stones, and, in some cases, burying their dead beneath the monuments. The best known of these sites is Namoratunga. Its 19 basalt pillars are aligned in a roughly circular layout, some leaning, some upright. For decades, researchers debated whether these stones held astronomical significance. A 1972 theory proposed that they were a lunar calendar aligned with the rising positions of certain stars used in traditional Borana timekeeping. That interpretation has been challenged in recent years. New dating techniques suggest the site is older than previously thought, predating the Borana calendar by at least 1,000 years. If so, the alignments may not have celestial meaning at all, or they may encode a different system entirely now lost to time. Other sites dot the Turkana Basin: Lothagam, North, Kalokol, Lokori, each one unique in layout, but united by common elements: stone circles, central cairns, pillar arrangements, and evidence of human burial. Lothagam North, in particular, has offered stunning revelations. Beneath its mound, archaeologists uncovered a communal cemetery containing hundreds of individuals, men, women, children, all interred together without signs of hierarchy or status differences. No gold, no thrones, just bodies, beads, and memories. And that's where the enigma deepens. How do mobile pastoralists who don't build permanent settlements create such monumental, socially complex burial sites? What compelled them to gather, labor, and honor their dead in stone? It suggests a society with rich symbolic life, a community with shared values, collective memory, and deep reverence for ancestors. Perhaps even early forms of territoriality, staking claims not with walls, but with remembrance. It also points to long-distance connections. The materials used at some sites, obsidian, carnelian, decorative stones, had to come from far beyond the basin. These weren't isolated bands. They were part of a broader network, linked by trade, marriage, ritual, or all three. Yet the Turkana pillar sites remain marginal in the global history of megaliths. They don't fit neatly into the timelines of Stonehenge, Carnac, or Göbekli Tepe. They are African, but pre-pharaonic. Ritualistic, but not urban. They are evidence of early monumentality emerging from a society that didn't need kings to build big. And perhaps that's the lesson. You don't need agriculture, hierarchy, or metallurgy to make meaning in stone. You just need memory, grief, and a sky full of stars. From the Turkana stones, we leap back in time tens of thousands of years to the oldest mystery of all. Not a monument, not a body, but a question. Where did we come from? What was the first spark that separated us from our ancestors? What defines us?